Ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, my name is Børre Jacobsen, and I am the Managing Director of Northern Lights. It is a great pleasure, and it is with great excitement that I welcome you, both here in the room and the many more that has joined us online, to the 6th Annual Northern Lights Summit. 6 years in a row, our summit has brought together pioneers, policymakers, and industry visionaries committed to making CCS a reality. And every year, we are getting closer. Much has happened since we met some 16 months ago for Northern Lights and for CCS. CCS is becoming more real. The very fact that we are gathered here today at our CO2 terminal here in Øygarden, outside Bergen, is a testament to this progress. And for you in the room, all you need to do is look out the window to see the physical evidence of that. And 1 year from now, we expect that our first liquid CO2 ship will be ready for operations. This facility will be complete and ready to receive CO2. CCS at scale is becoming a reality right here and right now. And today, we are looking ahead at future opportunities and the challenges that we still need to overcome. Together, we will explore how we shape CCS into an effective tool to combat climate change. And the effect of climate change is upon us. The temperatures are increasing, and we notice this everywhere. Progress on curbing CO2 emissions, on the other hand, goes too slow. It is therefore more important than ever that we get to work and develop this business at scale and at pace. This is a formidable challenge. Despite the recent and ongoing geopolitical turbulence, the shortage of energy and soaring energy prices, we see that the industry and governments remain committed to reach its climate goals. It's just become a bit tougher. And we are trying to do our part, completing this project on schedule and on budget, and get into operations and start storing and burying CO2. We have put together, we hope, a rich, insightful program and an engaging program for you today. We hope this will leave you inspired, motivated, and ready to power on and making CCS a viable business and climate tool. And to help us guide us through the day, I'm very pleased to now welcome communication advisor and journalist Ruth Astrid Sæther to the stage.
Thank you.
Welcome, Ruth Astrid, and welcome back to the summit and Northern Lights.
Well, thank you so much. It's such a great pleasure to be back, and not least to be here on site, and such a fantastic day. Did you order that?
Yes, we normally organize nice weather when we have events at Øygarden, and I think the project director can testify to that.
Yeah. That's good. And do you remember what I said the last time in 2021 when I was lucky enough to moderate the summit then?
Yes, that we should meet here.
Precisely, and that's what you've done. So thank you for inviting all of us here, and congratulations on being on schedule. That's fantastic. Børre, you talked a lot about all the things that have happened since the first summit, and you also mentioned some of the things that have happened quite recently. I mean, we have more geopolitical tension in the world now. That has led to turbulence, as you mentioned, in the energy markets, with huge profits for some, enormous costs for others. The global average temperature is on a rise, and heat records have been broken several times only this year. Climate change is no longer coming. It's already here and highly present. With all this as a backdrop, you have gathered us all here today to discuss the viability of CCS. And we're going to do that with a nice bouquet of committed, extremely knowledgeable and hardworking people. And of course, you're one of them, and you're going to be joining a panel later on. But before we dive into this program, I just would like to know from your side of things, how do you consider the significance of CCS now? Is it stronger now than before?
Yeah, I think it is what we have seen over the past 3 years is that the commitment towards CCS is getting stronger. Despite all the other things going on, the commitment to meet the targets that we see with governments and with customers are still there. And also we see the political change. Policymaker now has come around to accept CCS. And I think a key point was when Kadri Simpson, the EU Energy Commissioner, in Oslo stated that there can be no net zero without CCS, was really, I think, summed it all up. So we see that, and I agree, we see the changes of climate change, and we have to make it work.
That's pretty precise, and that's a good march order. So should we just kick things off?
Why don't we do that?
Yeah, so 3 years ago, in September 2020, the Norwegian government launched its Longship project, aiming at securing the full value chain of capture, transportation and storage of CO2 in Norway. And of course, your joint venture, Børre, is an important part of that project. Longship has set sail and embarked on a rather long journey, and I wonder, and I guess a lot of us wonder what shores it's navigating towards and how the crew are going to avoid potential reefs and stormy seas ahead. Now, the Minister of Petroleum and Energy in Norway, he is in Brussels today, and he was supposed to send State Secretary Andreas Bjelland Eriksen to give us an insight in person. However, last week, Andreas Bjelland Eriksen was appointed the new Minister of Climate and Environment. So congratulations to him. But fortunately for us,
yes.
yeah, well, fortunately for us, the Minister of Petroleum and Energy in Norway, Terje Aasland, he did actually find time this morning in his busy schedule to record a greeting from Brussels. So should we leave the stage to Terje Aasland?
Why don't we do that?
We do that. So we can all give him an applaud into the video, and then we'll rejoin later. Thank you so much.
Dear friends, I would have loved to be with you in beautiful Øygarden today. But as you see, I am in Brussels to meet with the EU's Energy Commissioner. I will talk to her about how important carbon capture and storage is to cut emissions and reach the climate goals. I will also highlight the opportunity that Longship and Northern Lights represents for Norway and for Europe. Northern Lights is a unique pioneer project, not just as an important piece of the CCS value chain in Longship, but also as a driving factor for other CCS projects in Europe. Next year, you will be ready to receive, transport and safely store CO2 from various industrial sources on a large scale. That is a historic achievement. There are still challenges ahead. Several barriers must be addressed before a European CO2 market is fully up and running. I hope you will have good discussions today about how we can solve these challenges together. And I'm sure, based on the competence, experience and commitment present in Øygarden today, that we will succeed. I wish you a fruitful conference and see you next time.
Thank you to the Minister, Terje Aasland. And as we saw and heard, he is currently in Brussels at the heart of the European Union. And the Union's ambitious goal for 2050 is to achieve climate neutrality, a goal that is going to need carbon capture and storage at large scale to be met. That applies in particular to the industries with the hard-to-abate emissions. But what is the best strategy to get there? To answer that, I'm going to leave the stage to someone who is working on that particular strategic question right now. She is seconded from the Norwegian Ministry of Petroleum and Energy as a national expert, and she has more than 10 years of experience of working in the energy sector and the CCS area. Getting the European Industrial Carbon Management Strategy in place is urgent, yet Johanna Fiksdal has found the time in her busy schedule to come here today and give us an update on the latest development for the strategy. So please welcome Policy Officer at the European Commission, Johanna Fiksdal.
Thank you. So first of all, I'm very happy to be here today. It's sort of an energy day, I would say, in Europe. Like we saw, the minister is in Brussels, and of course I would have liked to welcome him there, but it was more important for me to be here, of course. Also we saw this morning the IEA publishing the World Energy Outlook, as well as the State of the Energy Union report, where you can also actually find a fiche on CCS because it's focusing on the strategic technologies for the Net Zero Industry Act. So I'm seconded from the Norwegian Ministry, so I'm Norwegian, but today I will speak on behalf of the Commission and provide the EU perspective, what is happening, because it's actually happening a lot right now. It's not the first time that I'm here in Øygarden, so it's very nice to be back and see things getting into shape. The tanks are up now, like vertically. It's very good to see. So I will get to the next slide. So why am I in Brussels? It's because the EU Commission has decided that they want to build a strategy for ICM, that we now call it, instead of CCS. And ICM stands for Industrial Carbon Management. And the reason for that is that we want to cover both CCS, CCU, and industrial carbon removals. And this is not happening out of the blue. We already have different elements that we can build on. First of all, we have existing framework and projects, for example, the Innovation Fund, where some of you, I guess, already applied and maybe got financing. And we have the CCS directive, which is also, of course, very important. Another element that you probably also know is the CCUS Forum, and that was already mentioned that Kadri Simpson came to Oslo last year, and it was a very successful event. So successful that this year our next plenary meeting in Aalborg is already closed for physical participation, but you can still attend online. And the third element is, of course, the Net Zero Industry Act, which has created a lot of attention, especially here in Norway, because of the storage obligations. But just to say that the negotiations are still ongoing, so it's still taking shape now. And then I would like to highlight, because we decided to commission 2 different studies. And me, I work in DG Ener, so from our side, the transport infrastructure is very important, both providing the right incentives, but also how you are going to regulate it and to what extent. So this study came out before summer, looking at different elements and giving very essential inputs for us now for the strategy. One thing is that we see that there is a need to have more of a holistic view on, for example, CO2 standards, because we want to make sure that CO2 can flow freely across Europe, so you don't have project-specific or country-specific rules for that. And another thing that we see becomes very important is to have long-term planning for how we will build a network and also integrate it with other networks such as gas and hydrogen and electricity. The other study that we commissioned is finalizing now. It's done by the JRC, which is the Joint Research Center of the Commission. This study is focusing on how we can connect the dots in Europe between the sinks and the emitters, and to do this in a cost-optimized way. So cost is the focus here, and building sort of the backbone in Europe, mainly with pipelines, but also with shipping. So JRC now has developed different scenarios for how they think that the infrastructure can develop. And of course, we don't know yet. But I guess from this audience, it can be relevant to understand that, for example, One scenario is what happens if we can only have storage inside the EU, and what happens if we also include Norway and the UK. What happens if we can only do offshore storage, because we know that there are some obvious challenges of doing it onshore due to public acceptance. So these are some of the things that we are now trying to understand. And I think this will also be a good tool for us now in terms of the network planning. Eventually, when we can actually see the projects being announced and some pipelines being built, and we can sort of connect the dots along the way. But it's, right now it's more of a theoretical exercise, because as you know, Longship is very good that we can see construction taking place, but we still need to see a lot of FIDs in Europe. So when we are doing a strategy in the Commission, it's also mandatory to do a public consultation. And again, I guess this is maybe familiar to a lot of you already. We were quite impressed with the feedback that we received on the public consultation. It was done over the summer, but still we received a lot of feedback. It was a questionnaire where we received almost 300 feedbacks, and you could also submit position papers to write more freely. And there we also got 205 different ones. So we organized a workshop in Brussels on the 6th of October, where you could also attend online. There were more than 600 participants. So yeah, I think it's safe to say that there is momentum now for CCS in Europe. So that's very good. So now we are analyzing the results of this consultation, and this will also provide inputs for the action points that we are evaluating for the strategy. So to try to be a bit more specific what we are considering, of course we have a lot of ideas, and we have close contact with industry. We have the two studies that I was talking about. We have the CCS forum. So it's a lot of inputs. But like I said, from the DG Ener's side, the transport infrastructure is key. So, and in connection with this GRC study that I described for you, how to plan the network now is very key, because we see that so far it has been a bit fragmented, how the market has developed. Which can make sense like for the first mover projects. But if we're going to scale it up, we need also to build the CO2 hubs and the clusters across Europe, and also to make sure, for example, that we also have the dispersed emitters, landlocked countries. For example, waste to energy plants, they don't maybe have very big emissions, but we still want to make sure that they have the bargaining power to become part of the infrastructure in Europe. And we are also cooperating very closely with DG Klima on the strategy. So they are responsible for the capture part and the storage part. And of course, storage capacity needs beyond 2030 is also something that we are looking at to provide milestones. But I would like to emphasize that the strategy will cover the whole value chain. So, and ZEO was only the beginning. In Brussels, we think that it made sense to start with storage as the bottleneck because of the long lead times, and we saw that a lot of capture projects needed certainty for where they could send their CO2. But it's all connected. So, and I can only say that this strategy now will propose a lot of actions, but it will be a stepwise approach. So there are still things that we need to assess further, of course. So just my last slide. I guess you're already maybe familiar with these working groups. We have 4 different working groups under the CCS forum. And we will have a plenary meeting in Aalborg on the 27th and 28th of November. Originally, it was planned to announce the strategy at this forum, but now we have decided to postpone it to the first quarter of 2024. And the reason for that is that we want to connect the strategy with the 2040 targets that DG Klima is going to publish. So I think it also makes sense to do this, to have more updated estimates and see this in connection. So I would like to encourage everyone, of course, to maybe not go to Aalborg if you didn't get the confirmation yet, but to attend it online. And then, I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts and the perspective of what is going on the projects and also from the government side here today, because, I think in Brussels we are very impressed with what is going on and that things are happening so fast. So we're just trying to keep track now with everything going on. So, thanks.
Thank you so much, Johanna. Would you like to stand in the center of the stage? I think we have time for a couple of
hiding behind.
Yeah, you don't need to hide at all. So thank you for that nice update. And you mentioned at the end that there's been a postponement of the launch of the strategy itself. Time is pressing. What do you think this particular strategy can do to make the deployment of, and I've learned ICM, really efficient?
Yeah, so like I said, I think we already have different elements that we can build on now. And what is good now that it's not good that we are postponing it in itself. It's not going to like float away. We have a plan, just to say that. But I think it also makes sense now to look it into relation with NZIA. Because
the Net Zero Industry Act.
The Net Zero Industry Act, sorry, all of the acronyms. But I think this can also, because what we are seeing now actually is that Parliament and Council and everyone is pushing for covering more and more into the Net Zero Industry Act and also to cover the whole value chain, things like that. But this is what we were supposed to do in the strategy, so it will already be there. But I think, like you said, time is of essence, so we want to push it, of course. But I think that it's also a realization that we don't want to overregulate it too soon. We want to do this good and not rush it, and we want to do it for the industry. So we want to make sure that we have evaluated things before we push ahead. So,
But do you think, because the Net Zero Industry Act is aiming at a injection capacity within the European Union by 2030 of 50 million tons annually? That's quite big. Is it realistic that you're going to get there? So that's the first part of my question. I'll have a second question afterwards.
Can I answer now?
Yes.
Yes.
You think so?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a short and nice answer. So does that mean, because you mentioned the UK and Norway not being part of the Union itself, but I mean, in these specific areas, there is a capacity as well of storage.
Yeah.
Will that be applicable for the EU?
So maybe first of all, on the realism of the target, I think that what we are seeing now, if we try to sum up all of the projects announced on the capture side, I think we arrived at maybe 80 million tons in Europe by 2030. And then we also have the climate neutrality goals by 2050, saying that we need between 300 and 600 million tons every year to reach climate neutrality. So, I think 50 can be done for sure. But again, lead times, especially for storage, are normally maybe 7 to 8 years. So, we need to push ahead. But when it comes to Norway and the UK, from the Commission side and from Brussels, we of course hope that Norway will incorporate it, but it's up to the Norwegian government first to assess it if it's EEA relevant, and then we will negotiate if we will scale up the targets after that.
Yeah.
But I think it's safe to say, since I'm Norwegian and know what is going on here on the Norwegian continental shelf as well, that we already see a lot of projects being announced, and there's a lot of interest in doing that and applying for licenses. So yeah, we can just hope that you will join us.
So with that final word, Johanna Fiksdal, I'm going to say thank you so much for being here today and giving us that update, and good luck with the continuation of your work. Time is pressing. We're all waiting. So thank you so much, Johanna.
Thank you.
Final words for you. Now, let's move from policy instruments and strategies to an analysis of the ongoing projects within CCS, or ICM, as I've learned that we should say now. So to the proof in the pudding, so to speak. We're going to lend ears to project manager Per Finstad at Rystad Energy, which is an independent research and business intelligence company. Now, they are known for gathering and analyzing huge amounts of data from the entire energy industry and to connect all the dots for us to see the whole picture. So the obvious question to Per Finstad is, of course, what does the overall CCS picture look like for the world and for Europe? So give him a warm round of applause. Per Finstad, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to come here to speak today. I'm going to spend the next 10 to 15 minutes going through a brief update of what's going on in the CCS industry. So, is it a touch here next there? So I'll start by giving a little bit of a backdrop. So what you see here are different scenarios for the CCS industry. So highlighted in orange, you're seeing our base cases for 3 different degree scenarios. So you have your 1.6, 1.8, and 2.0. So what we have done here is we've looked at IPCC's carbon budgets, and we've looked at what's the role of CCS within each of these budgets. And based on that, we have made up these charts and showcased that there's a potential for between 4 to 8 gigatons of CO2 capture globally by 2050 within these budgets. We also included some other companies with various different targets or potential developments for CCS, seeing that the range here is quite wide, but the general trend is that when you move out in time, CCS has a quite important role in all of these. Now, that's the theoretical backdrop. Moving on to what we actually see in the market today, I brought with me 2 charts here to give a little bit more of detail. So I'm starting on the capture side here. What we see here is stacked up the announced capture projects first in the world on the left-hand side, and then zooming in on what's going on in Europe on the right-hand side. So these are all the announced capture projects, which we track bottom up, so project by project. And we can see here on the left-hand side that the vast majority of these are located in North America and in Europe. So that's where the main interest so far has been on the capture side. If we zoom in on Europe on the right-hand side here, we can see that there are some industries or some parts of the world that are driving this interest more than others. And we can see on the bottom there that industrial emissions are the ones that are pushing for the capture interests the most in Europe. And the second one is power generation, where you have your gas-fired power plants, your coal-fired power plants, and so on. Now, these are all the announced capture projects so far. That doesn't mean that all of them will materialize in this pace. Some of them will see delays, and some of them might not occur. So on the next slide here, I wanted to go into the more thorough analysis on where we consider CCS the most relevant within Europe. So starting on the left-hand side here, we're starting with the global emissions of CO2 as of 2021, so a little less than 40 gigatons of CO2. Now, if you zoom in on Europe, you're already there at less than 10% of the emissions. But if you split those up in the different sectors where they're stemming from, We have gone through each and every one of them, seen where is the potential most relevant for CCS, where are other opportunities for CO2 abatement more difficult. And then we're ending up at around 250 million tons of CO2. That's highly relevant for CCS in Europe. Now again, this doesn't mean that all of these volumes will find their way into CCS, but it also doesn't mean that neither of these will find their way into CCS. So moving on a little bit from the capture side, I wanted to compare that to what's going on the storage side as of now. So quite a lot of things going on in this chart. What I've done here is I've started by taking those volumes from the announced CO2 capture projects. I've zoomed in on EU for a comparison. So the bars you're seeing here are those same announced capture projects for within the EU. And then I'm comparing that first to the storage capacity that have so far been FID'd in Europe or in EU. So that's only one. That's the Porthos project for now. Of course, in the rest of Europe, you have an additional one, this one here. And then I'm also comparing that to the storage target of EU at 50 million tons per year. So going a little bit back to the realism of that target, we can already see now that only 7 years prior to this target, we're only at 5% in terms of FID capacity. And another thing that's quite interesting to see here is that when you move above this 50 million tons per year, you see that the capture interest is already there. There are companies already showing interest to store more than 50 million tons per year within EU itself. So this doesn't mean, again, that all of these volumes will come to life, but it does mean that there's a potential for it. There's a potential to fast-track this industry, and then I've listed up some bullets on how that can be done. You have your policy instruments, you can have rallying private initiatives, which will be key to make this industry develop. And you can also look beyond the EU, and then naturally other parts of Europe, such as here in Norway and the UK, are natural places to look. Now, what this brings together in my mind is the chicken and egg issue, which is an issue we're speaking about in many industries, the CCS industry as well. And what this means is that on the capture side, you of course want to have a secure value chain. You want to know you have the option to store your CO2 before you start planning and investing in capture. But on the same time, on the storage side, you also want to make sure that you have CO2 volumes coming once you start investing in your projects. And what this basically means is that neither wants to be the first to invest, but both have to be interested enough to invest to make the other project fly. And what that means is basically that the development around this needs to be very supportive. You need to have robust policy to support this development, but you also need frontrunners, both on the capture side and on the storage side, to make sure this market actually develops. Finally, I've brought in one slide showcasing a little bit more into what's actually happening in the market. So on the left-hand side here, we're tracking all the alliances we see developing for the last 5 or 6 years around the world. We can see that the vast majority of these, more than 600 alliances, the vast majority of them are partnerships, collaborations, agreements, very important developments, but not necessarily developments where you instantly see money being pushed into this industry. So what I wanted to zoom in a little bit more on for the final part here is the M&A activity we've seen so far, and specifically what we've seen so far in 2023. So I listed up some of the key M&A activity we've seen in 2023. And I think one of the interesting things to see here is how the M&A activity spread vastly throughout the value chain. So you have activity within the capture side, you have activity within the transport development of CO2, and you have activity going on in the storage side. But you also see players directly investing in specific projects. Another interesting thing on the left-hand side here, or in the left-hand side of the table, is also seeing who's active within this space. And you can see that there's quite a lot of energy companies, traditional energy companies, and quite a lot of them traditional oil and gas companies. So that's what I had with me today. Thank you so much.
So we'll swap place.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Per. That's very interesting. And M&As, that's merger and acquisitions, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yes. I'm so happy every time I understand all these abbreviations. Yes. Would you say, looking at, there's a lack of FIDs all along the value chain. That's something that you pointed out. But would you say that there is a commercial potential in CCS? And if you say yes, for whom? And when is it probably going to be realized?
A lot of good questions. I think I can start by talking to the general commerciality. I think, yes, there is commercial potential within this industry. I think it's fair to say that this is not the oil and gas industry with the extreme profitability we can see from time to time.
They can't expect the same profitability.
I don't think so, no. That's a quite unique industry in a global context. But that doesn't mean that there is not commercial potential within this industry. And I think it goes throughout the whole value chain, actually. I think you have interesting capture projects, both in terms of cutting cost, but you also have the opposite side, for instance, with BECCS, bioenergy with capture, where you can actually have income on your stored CO2 emissions. I also think there's potential throughout the value chain in terms of storage and transportation. But I think there's a couple things that will be quite important in that part. I think one, CCS is a new industry, but a lot of it is building on existing knowledge. And hence I think having companies with this experience with wells, experience with ships, experience with pipelines, is critical to make sure it's a cost-efficient industry development. And then, of course, you need your front runners, but over time, once you can get standardization and larger scale on this, I think the commercial potential is greater.
Yeah. Well, on that happy note, I'm going to say thank you so much, Per Finstad, for being here with us today. Thank you so much. And now we are going to discuss further. So we know that there's more than enough CO2 to be captured, and there are quite a few storage projects in the pipeline. However, CO2 being labeled as waste is still, at the moment, cheaper to emit than to capture and store. And how can we make this industry commercially viable? What potential are the first movers seeing in this market? So we're going to discuss this with three actors at the storage end of the value chain, front runners, as Per mentioned, together with a financial matchmaker from the investor side. So I want you to welcome onto the stage the following panel. Kevin Meisel, who is country lead for CCS and Hydrogen Norway at Wintershall Dea. Please come up and you'll have a nice round of applause on your way up. We have Øystein Arvesen, who's VP Strategy and Sustainability at Aker BP. Thank you. Jostein Borg Tegle, who is Strategy and Market Director at Northern Lights Joint Venture. And last but not least, we have Eduardo Famiglia Silva, who is Director for Renewables and Energy Transition at the RBC Capital Markets. Wonderful. And if anyone wonders, RBC, it's the Royal Bank of Canada. So we've established that. Welcome to you all. Nice to see you. Nice and sharp, everyone. So, Wintershall Dea, Aker BP and Northern Lights, you all have licenses for storage on the Norwegian continental shelf, so the NCS. And Kevin Meisel, I would like to start with you. You represent, as I said, Wintershall Dea, and that's a traditional crude oil and gas company that has been through a pretty large restructuring phase the last 3 or 4 years, and it's still ongoing, as I understand. And CCS is being considered a new business opportunity for your company. And you actually have not only one, but you have two exploration licenses on the NCS, he said, and he laughed. Now, you were the first employee at Wintershall Dea in Norway to work on CCS, but now you have approximately 90 colleagues with you, and you are certain that CCS is going to continue to grow. And I'm curious to know what makes you so certain of that, and how do you see that growth happen and flourish?
Yeah, thanks. First of all, for having me here. I think it's also a great sign of the spirit of the industry that you're actually inviting competitors onto your sacred ground here. So I think that that view of that we have to pull this up together, that's really pronounced. So thanks very much for having me. I think the traction that has been described by the previous speakers is quite obvious, right? From a couple of years back, where CCS was, you know, a good idea from researchers as one of the mitigation measures for net zero. It started to be promoted by bodies like the IEA, you know, and now it's basically sinking into the public discussion much more. The acceptance is rising. So all of this is definitely going in the right direction. Also, maybe to mention that most of the net zero strategies of the countries in Europe and also elsewhere have CCS as one of the important pillars for their net zero targets. So I think we are clearly on the right path. You know, now with Porthos, I think there was really good news. Northern Lights leading the way. I think the
momentum is here.
The scene is set.
Yeah.
So now we basically, and that's the topic of today, we need to establish a market rather than single projects.
And that's what we're going to discuss. And this is kind of an introductory round, and I'm going to continue and hear from Aker BP, which is also a pure play E&P company with no intention of entering CCS at all, at least not until March this year. Because then, out of the blue for a lot of people, Aker BP was awarded a license for storage on the Norwegian continental shelf. Øystein Arvesen, as I mentioned, you are the VP Strategy and Sustainability at Aker BP. I'm curious to hear about all the internal discussions that must have taken place at Aker BP lately. What happened?
Well, I can share with you that it didn't come out of the blue for us.
That's good to hear.
We've had a dedicated CCS team now for around 2 years, and it's correct, though, that we have said no to CCS for many years before that. And
why?
Well, it was sort of this big, vague topic that we didn't see a clear-cut position for Aker BP in that whole space. But then again, I think from, let's say, 2019 up until today, a lot of things has happened. Northern Lights, we all need to thank Northern Lights as catalyzing a lot of momentum in the industry. We saw capture projects gaining traction. We saw, specialist capturing companies really investing in the Aker family. We saw Aker Solutions carving out Aker Carbon Capture, and the transport companies, shipping companies. So we suddenly saw more of a clear-cut position as a storage expert that Aker BP could take, and then it made a lot more sense for us.
Because you had the competence within the company.
That's about understanding the subsurface, drilling wells, developing offshore facilities, and that's what we do at scale today. So we really thought we had a competitive advantage in doing that as well for carbon storage.
Did any of your owners, like Aker and BP, influence this decision of going for CCS?
Well, obviously, our owners are represented in our board, and our board makes the strategy decisions, so they clearly did. And of course, they have a lot of, or decades of experience, BP in Salah in Algeria, Aker with the Aker Solutions experience of Mongstad, and then Aker Carbon Capture, so definitely, yes.
Oh. Thank you so far. So we're going to continue this round. And Jostein Tegle, Strategy and Market Director at Northern Lights. You represent the third storage permit holder in the panel. And your company's role has been, to quote you, to be a trailblazer for CCS. And you've been recognized for doing that already in the panel, with, of course, the help of the Norwegian government. Now, others follow in your trail. How do you see the current development within CCS in terms of market potential? Is it emerging practically and technically for all purposes?
Yeah, first talk about the emitters. I think through our BD team, we have been engaging with customers for quite some time. And I think we have seen the shift in the dialogues from not only being about intentions and ambitions and concepts and doing MOUs to actually now negotiating real agreements, real commitments. And I think the two first cross-border commercial agreements for transport and storage of CO2 we have entered into with Ørsted and Yara is a good sign that this is actually starting to happen. And we also see other projects, as mentioned, like Porthos, taking FID, so more are coming. On the storage side, very happy to see, I was just looking back and when did these licenses were awarded, and actually 1.5 years ago, we were the only one. Now, on the Norwegian shelf, now we are 7 licenses Did I get it right?
Yeah.
7?
Yeah, I think for us.
Including us, and 10 different companies in those licenses. So being a trailblazer is, of course, also to make sure there are new companies entering into the storage. So I wouldn't say mission completed, but at least we see that is happening.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely necessary. And we need competitors because it needs to build trust in CCS. There need to be an ecosystem of multiple storages, competitors, and nobody want to do a business with a monopolist. So this is great to see.
Where do you see, I mean, pros and cons of being first?
Of course, being a trailblazer is not an easy job. And so
You have to pave the way.
We have to pave the way.
Yeah.
So it's both on the regulations. The regulations are not set, so we need to work with the regulators and challenge. But they generally very constructive dialogues. So that is one side of it. But also to build business models. How do you distribute risk between us as a storage and transport provider towards the emitters? And that's actually developing these commercial agreements are hard work. So hopefully it will be easier for those coming after. Of course, a benefit of being first is that some of it is mitigated, like with the Norwegian government. And also we get a lot of attention, and we also can influence the framework for the future. So that's a privilege of being first. But the pros and cons.
Pros and cons. Thank you so much. Now, let's conclude our introductory round with Eduardo Famini Silva, as I mentioned, Director of Renewables and the Energy Transition at the RBC Capital Markets. You describe yourself as a facilitator and matchmaker between projects and investors. And seen from your perspective, Eduardo, how attractive is the CCS field to investors? And now I'm thinking both in general, but maybe since we have 3 storage actors here, for the storage part of the whole thing specifically.
Of course. First of all, thanks to the Northern Lights team for the invite, and well done for bringing so many people here to our garden. Well, yes, CCS is attractive to investors. That's a simple answer. However, the framework isn't necessarily always there to make it investable. And listen, start with the good news. I would say the investor community is spending more time. And this is both strategic investors who have an interest in developing the industry, but also financial investors who have a mandate to invest in energy transition and in CCS as part of that. I would say, and you've heard of that before, skepticism is reducing, and this is almost also amongst the investors. So I would say investors today are pricing in that this industry will expand, one day will mature, and will become mainstream as part of the decarbonization process. I would say investors are taking note of the positive regulator developments, which is also great. So this is all good for sentiment and is starting to make investors more and more excited to invest more in the industry. Now, risks are still oftentimes substantial, typically and often beyond what certain investors can accept or mitigate. And I'm sure we're going to talk loads about this.
We're going to talk about that as well, yeah.
But the bottom line here is that there is appetite.
Yeah.
And a lot of it. And investors have invested in the industry, now just not enough and far shy from what we need.
But who are they, these potential investors and those, because you mentioned strategic investors and the financial ones. I guess the strategic ones tend to come first, or how does that picture look?
It's a lot linked to the riskiness of certain projects and propositions, but if you think about CCS in a broader sense, as ICM, or as I prefer even CM, just carbon management, then you have investors ranging from emitters of all sorts. These, even including like software companies, for example, have invested in the industry. And then you have financial investors also range from the most speculative investors like venture capitalists, investing in carbon capture technologies, to large-scale infrastructure investors, which would be the most suitable to invest in projects that are as large as this one. Now, in any of these different types of investments, you need to have the right framework to make these investments possible from an investor's perspective.
So the framework, then you think regulatory or?
So it's a mix of having the right parties holding the right risks and having the economics of the project overall to work. So if you think about CCS in particular now in large infrastructure projects, there is a risk around, for example, carbon pricing. So which part is the most suitable to take that risk? Is it the developer, the emitter, the government, or the investor? And that's a discussion that happens actually in every single project when we talk about financing. And I can say from an investor's perspective, the investment community doesn't believe they are the most suitable to hold the carbon price risk.
Of course. How committed are they? I mean, are they in for the long run, or you mentioned private equities? I mean, it's
Actually, those spending time today and investing in the industry, they are committed for the long run.
okay.
Listen, and in the investment community, typically investors see themselves as adding value in certain parts of the process of value creation. So some of them will see themselves as actually being in the development part, and then they'll sell when the project gets into construction. Some others will be helping the construction sell when the project gets into operations. And we see that a lot in the renewable energy space, which is much more advanced. So there will be an element of that when the industry matures a bit. But I would say now, because the industry, in a commercial standpoint, is so nascent, the investors that are making bets today are those that have a bit of a longer horizon.
Yeah. So, to our three storage actors, thank you so far, Eduardo. What are your reflections when you listen to Eduardo? Do you recognize the picture that he's describing in terms of investors' interest in what you're working on? Kevin, you're nodding. Don't be shy.
I mean, definitely. I mean, I hear you, right? There's big interest from investors, but I also heard your but, and that but, or however you actually phrased it. And that we hear a lot as well, right? And there we are basically talking about many of the risks that you have explained. Maybe to look at it from a oil and legacy, I'm always tempted to say, oil and gas company's perspective. We are used to high risk, but we usually are also used to high returns. Right? Here we are basically asked to do still high risk investments,
but potentially lower.
But everybody
returns.
pretty much knows that this will not have the same revenues and returns as it will as it had over the last couple centuries. The issue here is now how to bridge that, right? And for that, we are basically having the Innovation Fund, for example, that helps projects to basically have that first period of lower returns and high risk mitigated. And I think that works very well for many of the capture sites. I think the risk that, and I refer back to a meeting where many of you were actually also participating with the EU Commission a couple months back, where many of the capture projects were sitting in one room together with many of the storage projects. Everybody was claiming, yeah, we are ready. And then the EU Commission basically asks, is like, where are the contracts? And everybody's like, yeah, well, there's no contracts. And in my view, that is because of the interdependency risk, right? Everybody is really afraid of, okay, what happens if this one side of the value chain is not going the direction I expected it to be? You're left with a risk. For the capture, for the emitters, that is basically the risk that you have sunk capex into your capture projects, still have to pay the ETS price. And for us, as a storage provider, we're basically sitting on the investments without an emitter that is committed. So in my view, that interdependency risk and the mitigation form, some kind of external help for that risk would be key apart from the regulatory.
Yeah, you're all nodding. Øystein?
Yeah, I agree, and I both recognize what Eduardo says. I think there's a lot of interest and inbound interest. And that there's a lot of infra-type investors super eager to get into this. We're looking at long, pretty stable cash flows that can be priced relatively cheaply in the capital markets. But it's a bit too early for that type of capital, I think. The projects need to be de-risked further before the risk profile matches that return profile. Also very much agree with Kevin on what he's saying about this misalignment and contract and interdependency risk. Especially, I think a timeline from FID until you're in operation for a capture plant, at least the large ones, are going to be longer than the ones for the storage sites. So the FID timing and aligning those when you make the investment decisions, there's going to be a gap. And someone needs to go first and take the leap of faith. And I think the role of policy is to relieve that risk that one party has to take.
I guess this is something you can recognize as well, Jostein, that you have already discussed probably in all your...
Yeah, so obviously this is the kind of unique risk of CCS compared to others, is that you actually, well, we're not the only one in that situation, but you're starting a completely new industry without a framework all in place, and you also have like the upstream risk, like the subsurface, which is not which actually can be quite significant, and actually bringing in. So you need investors who are willing to be the front runner and actually risk capital. But at the end of the day, to unlock, you need to find that manage that independency risk through the value chain through long-term contracts. Until you have a liquid market far in the future, you can probably, like in oil and gas, you don't need a long-term contract to sell oil. You can trust the market is there. But now you really de-risking this through long-term contracts is probably something that will also make the investment community more interested and easy to enter, because then you can actually assess and quantify the risks. And that's, of course, an important element when we build this business.
Eduardo, when we spoke the other day, you said that governments need to be the first movers. Is that part of this picture as well?
100%. And the role that both Kevin and Oven are saying about having someone coordinating and making the process align timing and the industry move together, I call it an orchestrator, and that is the role of the government. Some governments are trying. So in the UK, you're seeing that development where the government's trying to marry the capture projects with the storage projects. It's working, but causing delays because, of course, coordinating such a large group of stakeholders take time. So there is no right answer yet. So different governments are trying different approaches. But I would say, for one, governments need to play that orchestrator role. That's very important. Two, from the perspective of the financial community, there is a need for what we call backstop. So like a stop-loss type of situation. The UK government is implementing these through a contracts for difference, in which if the carbon prices go very low, investors have some type of safety net. But in a way or another, mechanisms need to be created so that investors who cannot today price the developments of CO2 pricing, that they have certain type of protection to actually be able to make their investment decisions.
There are a lot of considerations to make, and I was wondering, regarding the customer side, how are you working to attract customers? Jostein, maybe you want to go first, since you already have things in the pipeline, at least. Some things have been signed, letters of intent and so on.
You asked about the pros and cons of being first. I think that's one of the good things about being first, that we become very visible and we see a lot of demand pull. It's not like we need to go out and do a lot of pushing our service. Actually, it's almost like the challenge is that we have a lot of approaching us and really have time to really work the agreements and land something. I think in our customer base, database of all the one we have engaged, it's more than 100, summing up to like more than 70 million ton per annum of customers. So it's almost so that has been the situation. Of course, when this mature, I think this will also change. That we need to be sharper on what is our advantage and how we are different and a different competitive situation.
So the rest of the storage actors here, how are you working to attract customers, and how far are you willing to go to make sure that you get these contracts in place?
I think, first of all, when you're awarded the license, you need to have some degree of commitment from customers. You need to prove to the ministry that you have a reason to ask for this license. So I think every license that has been awarded has a level of customer engagement backing it. And I think the next step is about maturing the commercial dialogue with these customers. That is something we and our partner OMV is in the middle of regarding Poseidon, our storage project. And also once you announce that a license has been awarded, once you announce that the seismic acquisition has been successfully completed, there's a lot of inbound interest as well, people wanting to talk to us. So we just need to continue the track that we're already on.
Yeah. Kevin?
Yeah, I would think Wintershall sales pitch, if you want, is in a way addressing many of the topics that we have already discussed here. The risk, right? The perceived risk from the emitters to invest in a project. And that is mainly two things. One is the interdependency risk that I mentioned, basically the need for all parts of the value chain to raise the hand at the same time and say, well, yes, okay, we do FID, we do this all together. If just one keeps their hand down in their pocket, then the whole project, the whole time, the value chain basically has to start, has to start from scratch. So by not only focusing on the storage, but also on the rest of the value chain. We have hub projects, we have strategic partnerships with the shipping company Altera, we have strategic partnership with Equinor for a pipeline project with some onshore pipeline providers. We are basically trying to represent the full value chain and thereby reducing the interdependency risk of the full value chain. That's the one thing, and then the other thing is redundancy, and that also worked quite well in our favor with some of our early projects. And as you mentioned, kindly in Norway, we have 2 projects. We also have some licenses in other countries, by the way. But we had some disruptive change in our first project, Luna, right, where the partnership changed. Our initial partner was exchanged. Now Total is in, so that basically is starting a lot of negotiations and discussions from scratch, right? How to market and how to develop, what is your timeline? Do you have emitters yourself? So we were able, because we had 2 licenses, to basically switch and to have to use our portfolio redundantly and basically continue discussions with the same emitters, even though we had quite a disruptive change in one of our licenses. So thanks to the ministry also to award us 2 licenses. That was really helpful. I think that is key, and that's our sales pitch, basically.
You mentioned the EU Innovation Fund. How important is such an instrument in getting this market rolling? Or the industry rolling, more specifically?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and as I mentioned in the beginning, I think it is really, really useful, especially for the emitters, because they will otherwise, they will not even make money with the fund, but right, they are not in this to make money; they are to avoid paying the ETS price, right? So it's basically pay less. So for them, EU Innovation Fund is a really good thing in my view. By definition, the EU Innovation Fund grants are given to projects that are non-commercial. They need to have a funding gap. I think with the ETS price, in theory, these projects should be commercially viable. So as I said, I think for the storage and maybe also the transport part of the value chain, it would be much, much better to directly address this interdependency risk, basically help the projects to mitigate risk if some of the parts of the value chain don't work. I think that would be even a more beneficial and better way to use these funds than giving a lump sum grant. I know it's not a lump sum to one part of the value chain, to just one project, but that's just Wintershall's view.
Any reflections on that from the rest of the panel? Jostein?
Yeah, no, we know from our engagement with customers and also that innovation fund is an important element. And we have also been supporting many customers with support letters and helping them in that process. At the same time, it's a kind of unpredictable process. A lot of work going into an application. You don't know the outcome. And when you get the outcome, there is a lot of requirements and milestones. And
it's rather complex.
It's complex. Yeah. And also what you see is you get a fixed lump sum and in an inflationary environment. So that is not trivial, because when costs go up through the value chain, which we have seen over the last couple of years massively. It looked like this was the bridge, but it may not was. And what we do see is that not many of these that have received the innovation fund have actually taken FID. Maybe there's nobody. I don't have a complete overview, but so something isn't working yet sufficiently to unlock it.
Do you have any suggestions as to what would make it work better?
I don't know. Maybe there is something around predictability. I think a lot of people look to the US with the IRA, and if you meet certain criteria, then you qualify. I'm not sure how straightforward it is in real life, but
it sounds very straightforward.
It sounds very straightforward, but I'm not an expert on how things really work on the ground in the US. But maybe there are things that could be looked into by the regulators or the policymakers. I don't know.
One question about the profitability. You said, Kevin, that there will probably be lower margins within this part of the industry. You can't expect to get the same returns as the oil and gas industry. Is that something the three of you are ready to accept, or your companies? Is that something you're
I can start with this one because I find it a conceptual mistake to benchmark the returns of CCS versus oil and gas. Oil extraction is actually getting a resource that has energy content in it, whilst here, the commercial framework is much more akin to waste management.
Yeah.
So the type of returns, and actually this is the complex of the business model. You have like operationally risks of oil and gas with commercial returns of waste management, which is actually much lower. So yes, I think by design, the risks will be lower, right? The returns will be lower. And to make returns higher to developers, investors, and to industry participants, someone needs to take that bill because managing CO2 is a cost. At the end of the day, it will end at the taxpayers or consumers. And governments will have a problem with that. So we all should expect returns to be lower. And I think that's well understood also from the investors' perspective.
Yeah. And these three gentlemen are nodding. Yes, Øystein?
Well, I think there is a conundrum here that we need oil and gas companies to develop storage, most likely, if you want to do it at scale. And we need to make these projects rank up in the capital allocation processes of these companies. And these companies will be taking on the risk of the reservoir performing, the project development risk. There is a price risk. We have no idea what the price for storing CO2 is going to be yet. And also the liability for the CO2 in the ground, which is quite enormous. So what is the price going to be for this? We have no clue how profitable carbon storage is going to be. And if you want a short answer on whether Aker BP is planning to work on zero to very slim margins, the answer has to be no. That wouldn't make sense.
No. Because your CEO, Karl-Johnny Hausvik, he said when the license was awarded that this provides us with an opportunity to explore both the technical and commercial potential of carbon storage. So how far would you say that you're willing to go until you see if it's a go or no-go?
No, I think we believe that we can find win-win solutions here. That there is a commercial potential in CCS, otherwise we would not have been here and been doing what we're doing. So we think the potential is there, and we don't have a threshold on how far we're willing to go to get there.
Good. I think we are getting close to the end of this panel, but would you say that looking at the market, and because there's a momentum, several people have said that already today, would you consider the CCS to be sufficiently mature today as it is to sort of continue a good development forward, or are there still some obstacles that need to be solved, and who are they in that case? Kevin, would you like to start?
I mean, I guess it depends what you mean by mature, right? I mean, we see in some of the capture projects, yes, the technology is there, but it sometimes there are issues still, right? Still, it can be described as a first of its kind, at least as a complete value chain. So in a way, it is not mature enough to attract cheap capital just yet, but it will, in our view. So I think, as I said in the beginning, we are on track, but we are definitely not there yet. And there's a couple nuts to crack. But every day, basically, you see positive news from all around the world on CCS. So I'm a strong believer that we are mature enough to initiate the next phase.
Cool. Thank you. Do you agree, Øystein?
Yeah, I agree. Technically, we're mature. We know what we got to do. There are some knowledge gaps working on those, of course, but technically it's mature. But there is no ICM. There is no industry. So in that sense, it's very mature.
Yeah.
And it's the commercial aspects. It's financial guarantees. It's carbon pricing. It's policy support, subsidies. So it's all around the commercial gaps that we need to focus most on.
Jostein, Northern Lights has a phase 1 of 1.5 million tons, and there's a phase 2 potentially as well. Are you sort of looking at that?
Yeah, we're definitely looking at that, and but it's again to line up the stars in a way. We have to have a technical mature project, and I think we are very much there. Not necessarily optimized everything we can. But then it's to line up and to commercially de-risk phase 2. And that means we need to have certain commitments, and we need to bridge the profitability, affordability gap. And we talked about like innovation fund and other mechanisms. So it's a difficult nut to crack, definitely. So I can't give you a timeline for an FID or something, but this is something we're working hard on.
Yeah. So Eduardo,
Well,
final words.
yeah.
Would you still encourage the appetite from the investors that you're in contact with?
Oh, absolutely. And we've done loads to encourage investment, and investments are happening. Now, to your question, nascent or mature, I would say if you're targeting here 300 to 600 million tons per annum, and currently we have basically zero, the industry must be called nascent. I think that's clear to me, commercially nascent. Now, what's getting more mature, and that's what encourages me a lot, is the level of understanding that CCS is needed. And this is across the overall stakeholder universe, governments, developers, emitters, and the investment community as well. So this is getting mature. Once we get to that tipping point, then I would say that the industry develop. I'm very positive about the industry.
Thank you so much for that and for leaving us with this optimism, sense of optimism. And of course, you still have a way to go. But good luck with all your projects. Kevin Meisler, Øystein Arvesen, Jostein Tegle, and of course also Eduardo Famini Silva. So thank you so much to the panel. Now, from the perspective of the storage actors and investors, we are going to turn the kaleidoscope to the emitters and the clients' angle. What does the CCS market look like to them? We're going to find out by having a chat with the company entering what is called the world's first commercial agreement on cross-border CO2 transport and storage, which is an agreement between the large fertilizer producer Yara, which was mentioned earlier, and Northern Lights. So I would like you all to welcome Lise Winter, who is SVP Upstream Projects and Technology at Yara Clean Ammonia. Come on down, Lise. Hello and welcome. Nice to see you here.
Thank you.
Ooh, they're actually rolling.
Thank you so much.
We have to be careful. So it's a little over a year ago that we got the news of this first commercial agreement between Yara and Northern Lights. And just to clarify the details before we start talking about the agreement and the processes behind, you haven't actually signed a legally binding contract yet, have you?
No, that's correct. So we are, since we have this commercial agreement in last August.
Yeah.
We have been working now, detailing out all the necessary details, all the required elements. It's quite a lot that needs to come in place to be able to get a commercially final legal agreement.
So it's more a letter of intent that was signed.
I would say it's more a high-level commercial principle agreement where we say that those principles still standing, but of course we need them to work on quite a lot of details, and as was already mentioned here, risk sharing is quite a difficult element that needs to come in place, especially when we have we don't have a liquid market for these contracts. So it's we have one emitter and one CO2 off-taker. And then, of course, what happens if we are shut down for some reason? And or if non-lights are shut down for some reason? Because then how to share that kind of risk? That's elements that typically needs to be handled. And also, these, as also was mentioned here, there was the need to have quite in the beginning, you need to have to secure the investment, you need to have long-term contracts, and then also the contract needs to also withstand the future. And a future
we don't know.
Exactly. And then, of course, then you can have difference. So you can have elements changing the market side for both sides, both parties. But of course, we are our site is in EU, and EU has quite a lot of changes in the regulations space. So that's also part that also needs to be involved in when you have a complete contract that needs to be to handle those kind of what happens if. So and of course it's also quite some technical elements that needs to come in place. Everything from what is the actual composition of the CO2. It's not only CO2; it's a lot of other things. And then the ship is coming. We have an existing quay. How are we able to assure that actually when the ship comes, we're able to load, etc. All these elements needs to come in place. So it's
sounds like big work.
Exactly.
So could you just, before we sort of talk a little bit more about the whole process and so on, could you just explain to us, you mentioned because it's not only CO2, so what kinds of emissions do you have from your production in general, and what kind of volumes are we talking about? Because that is part of the agreement as well, I guess. You said it's one specific site.
Yes.
Just tell. So this is in the Netherlands.
It's in the Netherlands. It's Sluiskil. It's very, very close to the Belgian border in the Netherlands. And but first of all, just maybe to bring our journey Yara have had since the early 90s. So actually we have reduced our emissions with 45%. It was more than 45% since the 90s, and most of it has actually been based on a own developed N2O catalyst. So with this 45% reduction, we actually, if we had been a country, we had been according to the Paris Agreement. But we are not
you
a country.
would be on schedule, actually, for that.
Ahead of schedule, actually. But anyway, that so the remaining part now is the emissions from our ammonia production. And ammonia production is the conventional ammonia production actually capture already 60 to 70% of the CO2. And if some of you take a beer tonight or a soft drink or whatever, that CO2 comes from a Yara plant. And since we are in Norway, that comes from our plant in Porsgrunn. But so we already capturing the CO2, and that CO2 is very, very clean. So it's actually almost food grade. So what we are going to do for this project, we are going to do what we already does. So we will liquefy that CO2. So we don't need to build a specific capturing plant. But then you can ask, why can't we just use all the CO2 for the brewing food industry, etc.? The point is that our plant, the CO2 is much, much more than the food industry can be able to take. So in Sluiskil, we are producing the CO2 is going to either food grade, the food industry, or we also have some greenhouses nearby that we're also sending the CO2 to. And then we also have urea production. So urea is a combination of ammonia and CO2. And I don't know if, so that is the main commodity fertilizer globally. And, but it also is, if some of you still have a diesel car around, you probably you need to fill either AdBlue or Air1 on your, as a catalyst, and that is urea. So we have quite, so our production is, so the CO2 is also going to urea production.
Yes, you're actually using a lot of this CO2, but still there's something remaining that you need to get rid of. Yeah.
And that is, so still we have approximately 800,000 tons of CO2, captured CO2 left.
Every year.
And that was actually a perfect fit when we had an early discussion with Northern Lights. That was a perfect fit with Northern Lights. You could see spare capacity. So long story short,
you're filling up the reservoir for phase 1 at Northern Lights.
Yeah, so it was a win-win situation.
Yeah. We've heard already, Lisa, that Northern Lights is part of the Longship project, where there are 2 emitters involved. That's cement production, also close to your sites, and waste incineration. And these are both receiving substantial public support to be part of this value chain. But Yara, you don't have that kind of public support today.
No.
And still you went along with this.
Yes, we went along. And, the Dutch government have some schemes. And we tried to apply for that scheme. It's called SDE++. It's a scheme, but it didn't allow to have CO2 cross-border, to store the sea outside the Dutch continental shelf. So so that was not possible then with Northern Lights. And then, but they have now also started with some tailor-made agreements. So that is an element we are exploring for the time being. And but I think it's important here also that this project for Dutch government is very important, and they see this also as a major step for their meeting their targets.
Yeah. So you're hoping for some kind of support from the Dutch government. Yeah. But still, you are running a certain risk. We were talking with the others earlier about the risks and so on. I mean, can you say how much you're investing in this to get rid of your extra 800,000 tons of CO2?
I think probably will not talk so much about the investments and such, but I think it's important to remember that, as I mentioned, that this is actually already captured CO2. So what we are doing is only to liquefy that CO2, have some temporary storage since it's a transportation by ship. And then, so this is not something new. This is something we're doing already when we are shipping out CO2 for food grade the industry. So this is nothing new. So the technical element is not very high risk, and so it's not a very costly. For us, it's costly because it's a large installation, but it's not the same magnitude as we're talking about for the capturing, where you need to capture from like the cement industry or Clemenceau, etc.
But emitting the CO2 would cost more, or?
That depends. No, it's of course the challenge in the Netherlands is also that the Dutch government has also added an additional Dutch tax on top of the EU ETS. So that also incentivizes to actually what also mentioned here, that it's more to avoid the cost of emitting.
Precisely.
So it's of course we wouldn't have done it if we
And you chose to go with Northern Lights, which is first of its kind. Why did you go with the first mover instead of waiting until the market is more mature?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because of course, as we mentioned here, that it's a high risk to be one of the first ones. And but here I think Yara also that we need to take our part of the responsibility on the climate change, and we are a huge energy consumer. And then we also are a huge greenhouse gas emitter.
Yes, you are.
So if everyone waits, nothing will move. So and I think it's part of it. So we need so our company has a drive now to meet. We are working on a broad spectrum of areas where to reduce our emissions, and as I mentioned, we already have done quite a lot. But we also have our targets to further reduce with the 30% within 2030, and then being climate neutral by 2050. So then you need to move. You can't sit and wait. I think that's the main why we, and I think also that in fact that the Northern Lights and Yara was so perfect fit.
Yeah,
made it a bit easier.
You mentioned initially some of the challenges or all the details that you have to sort of plan out before this agreement can be signed. And of course, you are setting a standard for other agreements to follow, and other industrial companies also across Europe looking to use Northern Lights or other storage parties. To what extent is that? I mean, do you think about that when you're doing the negotiations? Is that influencing the negotiations in any way that this is going to set the standard for a lot of others to follow?
Related to that, I think it's typically the first of a kind of agreements potentially doesn't set the standard because it's between one to one.
Okay.
And so for us, that has not been a case when we are discussing with Northern Lights. And I think also then how but of course it's important because in the beginning it might be that oil and gas companies think that this is more a reverse kind of a gas contract, but it's not. We talked about here that the profitability is different, and when you only have one-to-one, you have no liquid market, it's very different. So it typically is a one-to-one contract.
When do you think the final agreement is going to be signed?
Well, we are getting there, so I would assume it is not too far away.
Are we talking weeks?
That I can't comment.
I can ask.
You can always ask.
How significant would you say that the governmental support to projects like Northern Lights is to someone like your company?
I think that for to be able to actually be where we are today, and it's very close to getting a final agreement. I think that the authorities, the way they have with they put in all the funding for Northern Lights and Longship, I think it would not have happened if it had not been if they are not de-risked the development of the storage and the terminal here, and I think that is because, as was mentioned here also by the oil and gas or storage providers, is that for instance, if you're going out there, some companies might have execution time of maybe 4 or 5 years from FID. We maybe have 2 years from FID, and of course, if you want to have you need to align those. So if you don't have a de-risking of the investment, you will not, at least since you don't have a liquid market, you don't have any other options to go to if you don't have that off-taker. Then how to get out of the chicken and egg issue, and I think that is extremely vital to be able to actually develop this industry further. That you need to have the government typically that covers that gap. Because
reduces the risks.
Yeah, because if we are going to take an FID and taken an investment, and the off-taker has not taken an investment, we will not take an FID because we don't have a secure off-taker. And then it's exactly the opposite. So and then we're going to sitting there playing ping pong for a long time, but and that's probably what's doing in Europe for the time being. And I think that's so if not the government have come in and then that Northern Lights took the FID, have developed the project, and then it's very much de-risked. So
yes. Thanks to that, we are here now looking at the storage, or the terminal, and some kilometers away, the storage site itself. So thank you so much, Lisa Winter, for being here and sharing the insights and the perspectives of the emitters side with us, and good luck with finalizing the agreement.
Thank you.
Lisa Winter. Dear audience, in an hour we're going to get news from the International Energy Agency. We are going to have a status report from several capture and storage projects in Europe, and we are also going to have a second panel discussion, this time on the regulatory pillar of CCS. But before we do all that, I think it's important to recharge and get our energy levels back up again where they should be. In other words, it's time for lunch. But before you leave, people, to you watching online, I would have loved to deliver lunch to you as well, but the logistics are just too difficult to do that today. To those here at Øygarden, your lunch boxes are now served in the mingling area outside. And the following message applies to everyone, though, wherever you are. We are going to reconvene at 1:30 sharp, starting off with the updated net zero roadmap of the IEA. So that means my clock now is... We have to synchronize, 12:33, so that's in 57 minutes from now. Enjoy your lunch. Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed lunch, whether you were here or back at home or in your offices. Was it good? Yes. Thank you very much. So, due to a technical glitch, I'm sorry, I didn't get the chance to inform you before we started. So this is for people on site in Øygarden about the safety instructions. Because there are no drills or alarms planned here today. So in case of an alarm, we should all just evacuate through the main entrance, and the mustering area is at the far end of the parking on the outside, and Northern Lights personnel will escort us when or if necessary to the right location. So, sorry, I lost my voice during lunch. This July, as heat records were broken daily, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that the era of global warming has ended and that the era of global boiling has started. Nature is literally shouting at us. It is easy to get pessimistic when we look at the global emissions trajectory. They are not declining at the speed they should be, and the 1.5-degree target seems to be extremely hard to reach. But is there still hope? That is a question our next speaker is ready to answer. Dr. Mathilde Fajardi is one of the energy analysts at the International Energy Agency, concentrating mainly on CCUS, CCS, BECCS and DACs. In September, the IEA updated their net zero roadmap, and just a couple of hours ago, IEA Director Fatih Birol presented the 2023 World Energy Outlook from Paris. We are lucky to have Mathilde Fajardi here with us today, as she presents fresh from the press perspectives on the role CCUS could, or should I maybe say should have, as the world tries to move towards net zero. So with that, I would like you all to give it up for Mathilde Fajardi. The floor is yours.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation here. I actually had a quick lunch visit because I'm missing the tour later, and it was truly impressive. So thanks so much for having us in this very special location. As Ruth mentioned, so at the IEA, indeed, we explore all kinds of scenarios that goes to different targets, and we recently updated our most ambitious scenario, which is one roadmap to net zero emissions by 2050. And so today I'll give you a bit more context around this scenario, but really focus on the role of CCS and CCUS in that scenario. Is it like this? Yes. Okay. So we are what we can say is that the energy and climate context is not a very positive one at the moment. Our news screens are really filled with bad news, CO2 prices being very high, CO2 emissions being very high, energy prices being very high and volatile. And so it's really how can we navigate this context and yet come up with a road to 1.5 degree. What we're trying to see is what has happened which is positive, and we see some causes for optimism. The first one is on EV sales. We see that they have increased dramatically since 2015, actually by 2,000% since 2015, with really a strong growth in the past 2 years alone. Same can be told about solar PV, actually. We've seen a dramatic increase in installation rates of solar PV. So this is a really positive story, which actually currently our electric car sales are tracking in line with our net zero scenario, and solar PV installations are tracking ahead of our net zero scenario in 2021. So that's actually a pretty positive picture. Not all technologies have followed the same progress. Wind, even though there was positive developments before 2020, now wind manufacturers are facing some supply chain disruptions, high costs, and are struggling with keeping up the pace with manufacturing key components. CCUS is also a technology that, even though very promising, and we see a very important role for CCUS, its deployment hasn't been tracking in our net zero scenario. And so I'll really sort of deep dive in this on the role of CCUS in the remainder of the presentation. So when we look at this picture, can we reach 1.5? And the answer is yes. There is a route to 1.5. It's a narrow one, but this clean energy growth is really what is keeping it open. So let's move a bit more down to the role of CCUS. What we can see is that the historical deployment, as I just showed, hasn't really been following on that zero scenario, or hasn't been really positive. However, there's been cause for optimism, which is the really great momentum we've seen in projects announcements in the past few years, especially in the past 3 years. And so what we decided this year is for 2030 is to actually revise down our target for 2030, because this 2030 target is a very narrow path, or it's a narrow walk between setting a very ambitious target but setting still an attainable target. So it's an ambitious target for an ambitious scenario, but it should still be in the realm of reality. And so for us, we think that reaching 1 gigaton by 2030 could still be possible if we look at the project momentum that we've seen in the last few years. If this momentum continues and lead times are reduced, we could actually reach this level by 2030 with strong government and industry push. Let's maybe look a bit more at the sectoral level, what needs to happen to reach net zero. So we see that operational and planned CO2 capture capacity by sector, we need to scale up dramatically. So to 2030, we need to multiply by 25, to 2050 by around 150 to reach to 6 gigaton. So what are the sectoral implications of that? If we look at 2050 by sector, the first key use of CCUS is industry, or hard-to-abate sectors, as we call them. And actually, half of that capture capacity is industry is in cement. So cement is really the sector in which there's just no mature or just, no technology with high maturity enough that can get the industry to near zero emissions. And so that's why we deploy so much CCUS in this sector. The second key role for CCUS is carbon dioxide removal. So there's a lot of direct air capture, as you see on the top. There's also a lot of bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, either in the form of biofuels in green, also part of the power in blue, and a bit in industry. And this is really to offset these residual emissions by 2050, but also to address historical emissions. The third role is hydrogen. The third role is power, actually. So beyond BECCS in the power sector, we still need to deploy CCS on coal and thermal power plant, particularly coal, particularly on existing coal assets. So there's a lot of young facilities across the world, and in some countries, some continue to be built. And it's actually a very crucial part of the energy transition to retrofit capture on these facilities to really help these economies in transition. So that's particularly key for emerging economies. The fourth one is for hydrogen production. Actually, in our scenario, most of hydrogen production is done through electrolysis by 2050. We see a big role for electrolysis. But there's, having the right low emissions electricity supply to provide all this hydrogen is going to be challenging. And in regions with access to CO2 storage and low renewable availability or low and secure, low cost and secure gas supply, these are the regions where we see some room for gas CCUS for hydrogen production. And finally, we don't really see it here, but part of the captured CO2 is also used for synthetic fuel productions to abate hard to abate transport, so long distance transport such as shipping and aviation. And so I think these are the wrong set of slides. I just noticed at the beginning, but you're supposed to see also the project pipeline. And so the project pipeline is also showing that the good news is the project pipeline is diversifying now. We have about 400 million tons of capacity being planned. Rystad at 600. I think it depends on our definitions and our tracking. But we see at least around 400 million tons of CO2 captured by 2030. And it is diversifying, going towards dark air capture, going towards industry, going towards power, because we really need to move away from historical applications, which is today natural gas processing, which is still important, but not as important than all the other applications that are key for net zero. And so some sectors are tracking pretty well. Direct air capture, we have actually a lot of announcements with the caveat that these are still announcements. We need to see them actually coming into practice. And some sectors like industry, like cement, there's been a lot of momentum, but we still need to accelerate these announcements in cement because this is one of our crucial sectors for net zero. Now let's move on to the regional look. So I'm just here showing operational and planned capture and storage capacity today by 2030 in comparison with NZE scenario in emerging and advanced economies. And as Rystad was explaining this morning, all of this momentum that we're seeing, which is very positive, is concentrated in advanced economies. However, when we see where we need to deploy CCUS in the future because of a very young industrial fossil and power fleet, this is in emerging economies. And so the real need is really to move that momentum towards these emerging economies, because this is where the acceleration is going to be particularly key in the next decade. Some positive, here you're seeing that I'm showing planned capture and storage, and actually for the first time, storage has been tracking with capture, at least at the global level. We've seen a lot of also storage plans. It used to be that we had more capture capacity being announced and less storage, but now we've seen a much higher number of storage projects. This is partly due to the fact that now we are breaking up the CCUS value chain, as we've discussed already. We are developing capture projects, storage projects, and each CO2 hub, as we call them, are really sort of high capacity, and they're ready to cater for different emitters, or at least that's what they're announcing. And so this has been part of the positive momentum, and I think this is going to be a driver for acceleration. And actually, even if most of these CO2 hubs are currently in advanced economies, we're actually seeing some of these hubs being developed in China, in the Middle East, in Southeast Asia, and these are three key regions for CCUS deployment. And I wanted to present you a last scenario. So I've just presented you a number from the main scenario, but we wanted to tell you what happens if we miss our 2030 mark. So if we don't deploy the technologies that we need for 2030, what are the consequences? So we came up with this sort of high overshoot scenario where we still want to keep the door to 1.5 open, but we sort of increase emissions because we meet the 2030 mark. We increase emissions, reach to about 1.7 degree for 50 years. So there are damages along that associated with that temperature before going down to 1.5 at the end of the century. So that obviously relies on more carbon dioxide removal. So we deploy, to bring it back to 1.5, we deploy around 5 billion tons per year of carbon dioxide removal against 1.7 in our NZE scenario to get it back to 1.5. And because we only model the energy sector, this is really within the energy sector, so we're only deploying BECCS and DACs to get to this 5 gigaton level. And so what we show is in order to get there, I mean, obviously, BECCS can be done fairly cheaply, but at least relatively to DAC, obviously, but is constrained by sustainable biomass supply. DAC as more of this siting flexibility, but it's very energy intensive and cost intensive. So what we see is that if we meet that, we can get there. We can get to 1.5 in the high overshoot scenario, but we would need around 35 exajoule per year just to maintain that system. This is the 22 industry energy demand in EU, US, and Japan combined. That would cost us around $1.3 trillion. This is 50% more than what was invested in fossil fuels in 2022. And in terms of land use, in this scenario, we're actually not expanding on land use because we're sticking with the biomass supply that we have, but we're deploying more CCS on bioenergy facilities. That means more of an infrastructure challenges to connect these very dispersed facilities that are relying on feedstock produced on 130 million hectares of land. That's the area of Peru, just to give you this idea of dispersion. And we need to connect all of these facilities with TNS infrastructure. And so I think the key message of this chart is really that heavy reliance on carbon dioxide removal has these huge implications. So rather than sort of missing this 2030 mark and deploy the same technologies just later and have a higher consequences, let's focus our effort is deploying these same technologies but earlier to 2030 to have less of that reliance. And I had some conclusions, but I think we can touch on them during the questions. But basically, CCUS still plays a crucial part in our net zero scenario. We revised on our target to reflect other sort of progress in other trends, such as electrification and hydrogen, but still being very positive to reflect that momentum. But we now need to deliver on this momentum, and we'll discuss that a little bit with Ruth. And again, missing this 2030 target means deploying a lot of removal, so let's just put all of efforts in to get to 2030 target. Thank you.
Thank you, Mathilde. I think people do agree with your final point. Absolutely. And yeah, you did mention it, but what would you see? Because you were calling on policymakers and industry leaders to sort of get this acceleration going. But what do you see as the main obstacle for that acceleration?
Yeah, no, these are good questions, and we discussed this before, so I was trying to include that in the presentation. I think, I mean, it's nothing that we haven't discussed really in the first half of this day, which I thought was very interesting. But the first one is really to create the conditions for investment. I mean, in all of the projects that are in planning, either 400 or 600 million ton, it's about 20 projects that have reached FID. So as we discussed, this need to reach the final investment destination, and this is on governments to sort of create the right market conditions, the right signals to create a sustainable and viable CCS market, either through policies, but also through putting a value on emissions reductions, through capital and operational support, through clarity on risk sharing, but it's also on industry to pick up on this opportunity and accelerate investment. So I agree that there's a big role for government, but there's a responsibility for industry as well to pick it up.
And collaboration should probably be a huge key word here then.
Exactly, and I think the second big hurdle is lead times, obviously, is to reduce lead time. I mean, now we've seen that projects have taken anywhere from 2 years from very simple sort of compression to use project to over 10 years for complex projects. We are now 7 years away from 2030. So there's a clear need to reduce that time. And as we discussed, these CO2 hubs that can help reduce lead times as new emitters could connect to an existing CO2 transport and storage hubs, but that will require coordination from government and that collaboration between industry and government.
So once again, a huge task to perform. I know that you're in a hurry, actually, because you have a flight back to Paris today. So thank you so much, Mathilde Fernandy, for taking the time to come here with us today.
Thank you.
Mathilde. So once again, there is no doubt CCS is an important part of the solution for a net zero future. But time is pressing, as we've heard several times today. We need to move so much faster. We've already discussed the commercial potential in CCS, or should I say ICM, and we've heard people implying that without public support, we would never have come as far as we are today. So is that the key for the future development as well, I wonder? We're going to discuss that and other questions with a second panel today. The tables are getting ready. Cool. Yes, so please welcome the following people to the stage. And you've been so good at doing this already, so keep on applauding them up. Alexander Eng, who is Deputy Director General, Norwegian Ministry of Petroleum and Energy. Benna Hedegaard Knudsen, Senior Lead Business Developer at Ørsted. Henrik Solsbruck, who is Head of Division at the Danish Energy Agency. And once again, Børre Jacobsen, Managing Director at Northern Lights Joint Venture. So welcome, nice to see you all. I actually introduced you it's a random order, so to speak, but I'm going to give us all a little background on why the four of you are here together with us today. So Denmark and Norway, they are sitting on some of the largest storage sinks in Europe. As you know, Norway, through the Longship project, has come quite far in establishing a complete value chain for CCS. Denmark, on the other hand, is a relatively new kid on the CCS block, but has certainly come up to speed for the last couple of years. May 15th this year, the Danish energy company Ørsted was awarded a 20-year contract for a CCS hub project in Denmark by the Danish Energy Agency. The same day, Northern Lights and Ørsted announced the signing of a cross-border CO2 transport and services agreement to store 430,000 tons of biogenic CO2 emissions per year. So we're going to get some more details to this from our Danish guests, and I would like to start with you, Henrik Solsbruck, Head of Division at the Danish Energy Agency. As I said, Denmark doesn't have a very long track record within the CCS area. I think there was a certain skepticism in Denmark towards CCS not too long ago. But now you seem to be running faster than anyone else. I see you even have your sneakers on. So what has happened? Could you please explain why now and how? And
Yeah, well, the sneakers are dirty because we are running
too fast
on tracks that are not that well suited yet. I think I would refer to the graph that was just shown by IEA, that in Denmark we have reductions targets.
Yeah.
We are putting on windmills. We are doing electricity or energy efficiency. Yeah. But we still need something else to get to the targets that we have in Denmark.
Yeah.
And there the politicians basically it was June 2020 decided that the CCS should be part of the toolbox for those greenhouse gas reductions in Denmark.
So you realized you had to do it, actually.
Yeah, it was, you were left with a gap.
Yeah.
We need to get the reductions. We don't have a lot of industry in Denmark, but we do have sort of a agricultural industry, and we need to do something with the rest of the emissions, and CCS was one of the tools that the politicians wanted to take into place.
Yeah.
And since then it's been gung-ho.
And not to get too, local or, too, how should I put it, internal, but it's still interesting to know how important would you say that the Norwegian Longship project has been to Denmark's CCS development?
Yeah.
If any role at all?
Where's the emergency exit? No.
We're good neighbors.
Yeah. No, jokes aside, it has been very important. We talked about the chicken and egg problem early on, and I think it's been important in sort of at least 2 or 3 different ways. One is, first of all, the learnings that we've been able to take. Yeah. I started here with a study trip 4 years ago for Gasnova, and just learning about the CCS and the whole public available information, and also government to government. That's one aspect. The other one is sort of the excuse when everybody says this is immature. Well, somebody else close by have been able to establish this. Yeah. That has at least helped us, also the politicians in that. And I think concretely in the maybe very hands-on when we made that agreement in May, the politicians in Denmark are not very patient, and they say, okay, we need these reductions in 2025. And I sort of explained them, it maybe takes somewhere between 5 and 10 years to establish a storage facility. Yeah. We don't have that in Denmark. There is this project in Norway, so if you want to do it, you probably lined up for storage in Norway. So the concrete project up here has made that political ambition able to feasible. Sort of come through and be feasible.
Yeah, and at the same time, you will be working in parallel with your own.
Yeah, of course they are happy with the agreement, but they are not over-exciting, happy that it's going to be stored in Norway.
But just, we're going to get back to this particular point later on, but I just wanted to sort of plant the seed now, because you are actually planning on onshore storage in Denmark, aren't you?
There's a panel up here, isn't it? Yeah. But,
I'm going to move on to the rest. But just to, I'll get back to it later. But
we are.
Quick
You're doing so good. We just,
I just wanted to have that confirmation. I'm going to move on. Thank you, Henrik. Benna Hedegaard Knudsen, you are Senior Lead Business Developer at Ørsted, and your company wants to take a position, and I quote, as a catalyst for change. And you are now actually establishing carbon capture at 2 of your plants in Denmark, and these plants run on biomass. Would that have been possible for Ørsted to do without the support from the Danish Energy Agency?
To be honest and frank, absolutely not.
No.
When we looked into the case, and also like the discussions have been going on today, there is an immaturity in the market. There is a lack of understanding of what value the different, you could say, services and products that come out of it, and what products are there. So for that and to get this started, it was absolutely crucial that there was state funding, subsidy funding as part of the scheme.
And also the political support.
I was going to say, alongside that being one thing, but more importantly, you could say the political backing and strategy for setting frameworks for how we could then operate within this. For our specific case, you could say state funding was not sufficient to actually FID the project, so we've had to go out and seek other financing sources. Through sale of negative emissions, excess heat. So sort of really looking into, you could say, different products coming out of doing CCS.
And you could do that without any risk of losing the public support.
So you could say that the framework that the tender that we engaged in with the Danish Energy Agency was an open book negotiation. So we've opened up our entire business case, discussed it, pulled it apart together in negotiation meetings. And it is because you could say the state funding is EU state approved and regulated to counteract for any sort of
cool. I'm noting. Then you decided to go to Northern Lights for storage. What is, in your opinion, the strengths of that agreement?
There's sort of three things really. The most important, or one of the most important, was that we were met with an extremely professional and experienced company, backed by experienced owners that have well understanding of what it takes, technical expertise. That gave a high degree of credibility. Following that, the Longship investment, the Norwegian state's investment and backing of the project also enhanced credibility around the project. And then the Danish tender was set up such that the operator takes full responsibility of the value chain and decides who to engage with across that value chain. For us to have FID, we needed binding contracts. And for that reason, being able to engage with a company that could deliver on that, but also with a high degree of credibility behind, was crucial for for moving forward. And then aside from that, Northern Lights, we see that you are also engaged in a lot of other activities that support up with the broader, you could say, deployment and acceleration of the CCS. CCS Plus is, the NL Plus, where we're looking into a methodology for how we can certify a certification scheme for negative emissions. So really, a part of taking that journey that we are also on. So a partner that is also willing to take risk and engage in other activities to mature the market.
Great, thank you. So it's natural to go to you then, Børre Jacobsen, still managing director at Northern Lights Joint Venture. So when Ørsted decided to use your infrastructure for storing their captured CO2, that actually became one of your first commercial agreements. We've already heard of Yara. How important do you consider this particular agreement to be for Northern Lights?
So I think it's hard to underestimate that, actually. It's extremely important for us. We had over-designed this facility compared to our commitments to the state. So we had spare capacity, and we had Yara, who we heard from. And then, so that was the first, but then actually to take it to with the next customer. And Ørsted went, for various reasons, much quicker than Yara because they had a deadline with your tender process for the state. So that was an enormous incentive to get things done quite quickly. But the fact that we were able to conclude on an agreement with another major player, I think it's profound. It was really, and it will be one of the highlights, I'm sure, of my time in and the time I have in Northern Lights. That's for sure, because it was such a momentous agreement. And why? First, I think credit to the Danish government for opening up for a tender where the CO2 is actually going to be stored in another country. It is very tempting for any country that subsidizes things to think, how can I build the businesses within my own boundaries? It's quite not natural because it's tax money they use for these things. So the fact that it was open for that, I think it deserves a huge credit, because we will need to do this on a European basis. We cannot do it on a nation-to-nation basis. Holland has put a ring around their country for their subsidies. We lost a lot of customers that day, potential customers, to be honest, because we were engaging with a number of companies in Holland, and once the state money only is stored within Holland, then that was off. So I think that's important. I think also the fact that it's biogenic, that this is actually, we're removing CO2 from the atmosphere through this deal. So it's not linked to the ETS and the quota system. And they found a way with another partner in this whole scheme, which is Microsoft, of course, to generate and help that company with their ambitions. And they are also present here today. So, and then the technological cooperation on the digital platform. Because now you have to go in, now we're going into a business where there is actually no, this again, it's new. So how do we prove that we have taken CO2 out of the atmosphere? That is a very complex question to answer. And it means a lot of data needs to be gathered along the way, so that at the end of the day, someone sits with a piece of paper in their hand and say, we've taken out X number of tons. So that is an important element. So for a lot of reasons, I think it's an important deal. And Ørsted is a company whose reputation runs far ahead of it, you know, in terms of their focus on sustainability. So we are extremely proud to be partnering up with Ørsted.
Yeah. Thank you so much so far, all three of you. But we have a fourth person in the panel as well, who's been waiting patiently, Alexander Eng, Deputy Director General at the Norwegian Ministry of Petroleum and Energy. You worked with CCS from the governmental side and for the Norwegian authorities side for years. And now we're finally starting to see concrete results of yours and many others' efforts. And I guess it feels good to hear them, you know, tell you about how important it has been, knowing that Northern Lights is also publicly supported. But what is your vision for CCS in Europe, based on the development that we see now? I mean, where are we heading?
Well, first of all, I think many others is a key word here in terms of credit. I think I just came in and was able to ride the wave
while it was on
its way up.
Okay.
I think I go to bed every night and I have a golden dream every night about a liquid market, a spot market for CO2 in Europe. And the reason for that is with the Longship project, we lifted the value chain with very high government support and the government as a 0% middleman. I don't think that's a scalable model. I think to decouple those investment decisions between the capture sites and the storage sites, we need to develop more market-based solutions. One thing is all the money that's put into this by the Norwegian state, and the other is the resources we have ourselves, and we have Gassnova, the Petroleum Directorate, and so on, but it's not a scalable model. I think the market needs to sort of do more of the work. So the key issue here is, how can we sort of help reduce the barriers to allow the market to do the work?
Because your support so far has been crucial. If that's what we've heard all day long. I mean, both from Denmark and from Norway, it's been crucial to get these things started. So how do you see things scaling up then?
Well, I think first of all, we need to look at sort of the low-hanging fruits in terms of barriers. A lot of minor issues that we need to solve, such as bilateral agreements between countries. That's one place to start. And then we also need to sort of put in place systems that allow for, first of all, before we get to a liquid market, we need to put in place sort of point-to-point commercial agreements and sort of allow for that to happen. But then we need to look more into sort of standardization, what to do with things like CO2 specifications to avoid sort of tying down value chains. And I think there's a huge momentum now in the North Sea region. If we add up all the ambitions that are in Denmark, in the Netherlands, in the UK and Norway, it's easy to sort of add that number up to more than 100 million tons a year in the early 2030s. But I mean, there's a lot of investment decisions to be made to get there. So we need to sort of, how can we use that momentum that's in the market now to scale it up? Because getting to a liquid market, it's not a question of sort of time, it's a question of scale.
Are you asking them, or are you trying to answer that yourself?
Both. No, I also think it's really important that we look at this from a sort of a regional perspective, a European perspective. So the EU Commission and the Industrial Carbon Management Strategy that we're waiting for is important in that respect, because we can't sort of look at this from a member state to member state or non-member state perspective.
We're going to get into that, but if we could, you've sort of slightly mentioned it. You described, Henrik and Benna, how the scheme has been working in Denmark, and there is a difference between the Norwegian way of doing it and the Danish way of doing it. Henrik and Alexander, how could you explain to us in layman words the major difference between the way you're doing it in Denmark and in Norway? I can see Alexander is looking at you to give the answer.
Well, I can start with a brief description of how it's made in Denmark. So the tender and the agreement we made is basically a sort of pay per ton reduced of CO2. So there's no upfront capex investment. It's purely you deliver, you get money, which obviously has a different risk profile, and that. Also, sort of from our side, I'm a government official. We don't want that matchmaker role in Denmark. So it's very much sort of the first tender was targeted towards the emission. Has to be in Denmark, and they, as Benna said, they have to are responsible for the entire value chain. So they have to find partners they like and make the business with. So that's very much our sort of approach to say, okay, we have a role as government, taking out some risk, adding some funding, but you, as the market, knows how to make the agreements and who you want to work with, and that's sort of, we leave that to the market. Part of the reason for that is, I think it was that one of the earlier gentlemen said it's a really slow, well, not. He didn't say really slow, but it takes time in UK for governments to make that possible. Yeah. And in Denmark, we didn't have that time. So we took another risk and then tried to sort of leave it to the market to make that match.
Yeah. Alexander?
Yeah. From the Norwegian perspective,
yes.
I won't even allow you to ask the question.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No, but it's the same question.
We've supported CCS from the Norwegian government side for decades. We support research. We support the world's largest, most flexible test center for CO2 capture technology at Mongstad, right across the fjord.
It's not too far away.
The right direction.
Yeah, not too bad.
That direction.
No, that one. Thank you. Some help on that. And in terms of the Longship project, the point was to sort of get the ball rolling. And to get the ball rolling, we actively went in and sort of solved the two key issues with CCS, which is the hen and egg problem, and also the cost issue. And we did that in a very tailored way, with a very heavy direct involvement. So
you were much more into the pudding, so to speak, than in Denmark.
We're into the pudding, and we have tailor-made state aid agreements with the capture sites and Northern Lights, and we follow up those agreements very closely through our state-owned enterprise, Gassnova. And that's an extremely sort of hands-on approach.
So from the industry side then, what do you see, Ben and Børre, as the success criteria? Because these two schemes or models are different, allowing different business models to develop. If you were to sort of put together a new model, how would that look? The best of.
Do you want me
Go
to
ahead,
start?
I can... We'll see if I'll supplement.
So first of all, I agree with Alex here that the Longship project is probably more like a one-off. I'm sure every project developer would like 80% state funding, but all funding also comes with strings attached. And I think the point was to demonstrate the possibility. And I think what was really smart about Longship was you connected the capture, the transportation, and the storage in one scheme. And we are bound to that scheme for the next 10 to 12 years. And we will have this conversation again on how successful it was. But it has already been, the main success has already been there in that it showed and demonstrated the possibility. So this is why I don't think we need to do a second Longship in Norway. And as we are contemplating how can we expand, how can we build on this site, and what is the next logical thing for us, we are not calling the ministry and asking for more money. We are looking how can we do this without funding. So that is my view. I'm not an expert on the Danish system. I think the pay-as-you-go, if I can call it that, have merit. I think to develop this, and I fully agree with we need to move quickly and scale for this to work. The problem we have is, and it's been already pointed out, is that it is much cheaper to emit than to store. And as long as that's the case, and we are doing everything we can to bring down the cost, even though the market and the tendency goes in the wrong direction these days, unfortunately, we are doing everything, but there's still a gap there. So we will need funding. And I think on the capture side, which is a significant part of the cost, I think they will need more funding than maybe on the storage part. But we need to do things also on the storage part. I do not have a new model for what that would look like. But I think still there will be a need for state support to make things happen.
But of course, funding is one thing, but you have other instruments as well, like fiscal schemes, taxes, public procurement requirements, and so on. Apart from that, Benno, would you like to comment as well?
I think what's interesting to sort of reflect on is that these two models have emerged at two different times. Yeah, and I think that's one of the crucial things is that, like you're saying, I think it's a good point. maybe there shouldn't be a Longship number two, because now we've built that credibility. We've started to sort of erode that egg and chicken challenge that's out there. And then I think sort of, again, we've only tried the Danish model. For a company like ours, this commercial flexibility, being able to manage and mitigate and understand the risk that you are engaging into, that you are FIDing your project around, is extremely important. So for us, sort of in hindsight, when we look at the process with the Danish Energy Agency, having a framework and a policy backing, a tender from the government, and a tender that allowed for competitiveness and commercial development within the value chain has been extremely crucial for us as a commercial company. In that, what we would like to do is of course to develop this further and capture those learnings to bring down the cost for the next project and for the next projects, and sort of ensure that we maximize the impact that has come from it. And there I think that that can happen because the tender framework was as it was, but that also happened because we could point to credible sort of concrete projects in the market, governments that were backing this as well. So yeah.
So the snowball is beginning to roll, exactly. I see we're nearly running out of time, so I have to move on. And I was interested in hearing from you what kind of regulatory infrastructure is needed to move forward in terms of transportation, safety issues. You mentioned standards, Alexander. And also on the agreements, you mentioned bilateral or international agreements. There's still a lot of work to be done. What is the status from the Norwegian side and from the Danish side on this regulatory infrastructure? How are you working on it?
Well, from our side, we're sort of, now that we put in place a lot of regulations before we had any projects. Now we have projects and we have some learnings, and we're looking at the framework. So that's one thing. And then in terms of the bilateral agreements to allow for cross-border flow, I think in time you might see sort of international agreements, but now it's important to get those first bilateral agreements in place.
Yeah.
And that's, that's going to happen.
Are you working with Denmark on this now? You know, as a follow-up of
very closely.
Very closely. Good. Sorry, Henrik. I mentioned the onshore storage thing, and I would like to ask you a question, quick one, regarding that. But looking at the public acceptance, because that has been an issue that we haven't talked that much about today, but it's been mentioned. How are you working, with the public to consult on having that acceptance for maybe storing onshore? Because that's quite interesting as well.
Yeah, it is. And it's right that there are, since June 2020, we say, okay, we will do CCS in Denmark, including storage.
Yeah.
The politicians moved so fast that we started in the North Sea, where nobody sees or feels. And now it's basically onshore. And for the last year, we've been sort of conducting an environmental impact assessment in 5 onshore areas, geographically spread across the entire Denmark. So far that process has been okay. 10, 15 years ago, you had the last CO2 project in Denmark stopped by local citizens, not really being keen on that. And it's so far a different story. We don't have any concrete projects yet. We haven't launched sort of a tender for the CO2 licenses onshore, but the entire environmental process here has been good. A lot of support from the Geological Survey and sort of a national gas storage operator as well. We do store natural gas that we also use sort of the experience to say, okay, it's not that dangerous. We know how to store gas, even flammable. But obviously there will be some local concerns. But so far it's about raising awareness. And I think the entire story around CCS in Denmark is also different. So we've chosen to phase out coal-fired power plants, stop for oil and gas production by 2050. So it's not an excuse to continue something that we don't want. It's to get that remedial, hard-to-abate elements out.
Yeah. My time, my clock is telling me that I have to stop now, but I just wanted to be reassured by the panel that you're using the momentum that everyone's talking about to move forward. So 1 sentence each, how will you make sure that we're not losing that momentum tomorrow and to make sure that CCS is getting where it should be? Alexander.
I wake up every morning and thinking about my golden dream of creating a liquid market and seeing what we learn from this project to implement and making it easier and reducing barriers for investment.
And Benna, what's in line when it comes to CCS for you?
So on the one hand, we're getting steel into the ground.
Yep.
So that is a huge accomplishment and really great. And then we are extremely excited about the movement in the industry, particularly what's coming from the Danish state, pipeline of different funding opportunities in schemes in 2024 and 2025. We have a portfolio of power plants, and we are a catalyst for change. So I think I'll leave it at that.
And you're getting up every morning being that. Thank you so much, Henrik.
Well, I have to make 5 agreements like the one we made with Ørsted over the next 2 years.
Yep.
And then hand out some licenses for CO2 storage.
So, are you ready to...
Two things from me then. Since you said one, I'll do 2. One, I go to work every day with 60 very dedicated employees in Northern Lights that work on everything from the pore space to the customer and work really hard and to develop this business further. And the second point is I'm going to stay close to this guy because if there's more projects coming from Denmark, we are going to be talking to them.
Well, thank you for giving us that nice lift up at the end of the panel. So good luck, all four of you, with dreams scaling up and making things reality. Thank you so much, dear panel.
Thank you.
Now, despite of different challenges, setbacks and ups and downs, there is a lot of activity within the European CCS industry. And just being here today at this site is one proof of that. But is the activity sufficient if the target of an annual injection capacity of 50 million tons by 2030 within the European Union is to be reached? It is time for a status report. We are now going to meet 4 actors or parties currently working on different parts of the CCS value chain in Europe. 2 of them are working on capturing CO2. The other 2 are going to store CO2 in their reservoirs. And the question is, to all of them, are they on track for 2030? We've given these 4 quite a task. In less than 5 minutes each, they are going to give us their perspective on where the CCS industry stands today in Europe. They represent different geographical and industrial segments, and we're going to meet them in the following order. So I'm just going to introduce them now, and they will sort of hand the baton on afterwards. So we're going to start with Floris Macor, who is VP Strategy CCS and Ammonia at the French company Air Liquide. He's going to pass the baton on to Leander Hannegreefs, project manager at Fluxys in Belgium. Then we will meet Helen Miley, who is project execution director of Porthos CO2 transport and storage in the Netherlands. And finally, Anne-Marie Manger, head of the joint team for Aramis CCS, also in the Netherlands, will finish the relay run. Hoo, hey! So it is a challenge for them to do this within such a short time frame, so make sure that you are, being as good as you are, giving them a nice and warm supporting applause as they go along. So with that, I'm going to leave the floor to Air Liquide's Floris Macor.
Thank you. So first 20 seconds, what or who is Air Liquide? 120-year-old company in industrial gases, and why we're interested in CO2. Because our clients are in a wide diversity of industries. They all have an emission problem, efficiency issues, and industrial gases are normally part that is unavoidable in this. I need to push the slides here. This one? The green button. So this slide will remain the longest. It's just to show you, first of all, what the International Energy Agency has said already. The demand is huge if we want to achieve a good planet climate. So that is a number. Then where are we at the moment? So Air Liquide is an emitter itself. It works with clients that are emitters. We have proprietary technology to capture CO2. We're not into the sequestration business, but the other part. So over the last 6 years, we've been working hard to get funding and acceptance for 15 projects. Half of them we are a service provider, or we're the emitter ourselves, and the other half we sell equipment, but we are also a co-applicant of the funding. So that total is about 5.8 million ton that needs to be sequestered in 2028, 2029 time frame. I just put a series of projects. The ones that will be mentioned here later is this one. It's a Porthos project. We started working on it in 2017. It's 4 emitters in the port of Rotterdam and 3 companies that will take care of the transport and storage. TSAs, transport storage agreements, have been signed, and we're in that one. The typical background of our clientele is refining and chemicals. It's not all natural gas, it's oil, it's off gases that is decarbonized. Next project is in Antwerp, together with Fluxys and BASF here present. Kairos captures about 1.5 million tons of the BASF site, partly emitted by Air Liquide, partly by BASF, and it will be liquefied in Antwerp and sent to a sink in the North Sea, and we're still discussing with several interested parties which one that will be. And then we will have 2 other ones. Everest is a lime, so that's also hard to abate. Everybody talks about cement, but lime is the same as cement. They have a huge CO2 footprint at its creation, but they have a negative footprint, negative scope 3 emissions. So if you capture the CO2 at its production, you're good for the rest. So this is a project that we will do together with Loist in Germany. And this is a project in cement in Belgium that we will do together with Holcim. They're both in the million order of tons capacity. Another project is in Normandy. It's a sort of amalgam of the other projects. So there's a lot of projects. I just mentioned you a few tangible ones where we're close to FID. We're not finished everything yet. Most of the things are permitted, but for instance, sinks still have a problem. So that brings me to slide number 2. At the moment, this is what is available at the market in 2024 here outside. And this is what we see as interested projects only in Northwest Europe. So this is the market demanding these kinds of volumes. So 50 million tons is not enough, obviously, and all the projects that we have, they don't add up to that. And if you say you're dreaming, maybe, but we are allowed to do that. I just heard from my Norwegian colleague, and wake up again. If we wake up again, this is what in the US, in the Gulf Coast, is closer to reality. These people, without subsidies, it's called 45Q, it's a tax break, they are really working on that. So the industry asks for these volumes. They need them to remain competitive in the international environment. And I think Europe, Northwest Europe, has the potential to do this. So that brings us to the next slide. How do we get that? Yeah. So first thing is we need to make sure that these false boundaries around nations are gone. And the UK, Norway, they are essential parts of bringing CO2 sequestration capacity to the Northwest Europe industry or the Western Europe industry. So that's absolutely important. And the governments need to make this happen, not say we will solve it in due time. I think this is one of the crucial things to make this liquid market. Second thing is just as important. The public needs to accept carbon sequestration as one of the key contributors to our climate change program. It's not forever and it's not for dirty industries, but industries like cement and lime, etc., they will need that forever. So we will need to build public acceptance. Last thing is we will not be able to do this alone. No company, bar 1 or 2, can do the whole value chain by themselves. So we'll need to have smart partnerships that are based on trust and take this chicken and egg effect a bit out of it and deciding that's not a real question that needs to be under. We need to deliver on our promises very quickly. Yeah? So I think I'm just in time here. Thank you for your attention. Yeah.
Thank you very much for also inviting us, Fluxys, towards the stage or to the stage. I think I can give quite a complimentary view on things as Floris and a couple of projects where we work together. First of all, Fluxys, what are we? We're maybe a bit of a different company. We're a gas TSO in Belgium, but also in adjacent countries in Europe. Expanded largely, but we put our focus right now actually on development of a hydrogen business and CO2 business. Here today, what you see is on the left-hand side is what we foresee as CO2 infrastructure in Belgium. And so you see actually a grid. It's a future view, of course. What we foresee, a grid which is largely, I would say, focused as well on what we know in routings of our natural gas grid today. And focused on where we see industrial clusters in Belgium and actually the main industry. As we already mentioned, or as Floris said, in Antwerp, we do have a lot of chemistry refining industry. In Ghent, we have steel making industry. In the southern part of our country, we have more traditional industry, the cement factories, the lime factories. And so those are all key, hard-to-abate sectors, which we are actually focusing and which we are, I would say, in long discussions with to also see what are their issues, what are their problems, and how can we actually also propose solutions to them. So that's what we mapped out. And now the next step was, okay, how do we actually bring all that CO2 towards a sequestration zone? Belgium is actually a country without any storage sites for CO2, so we need to find solutions. So we developed exit options, and we said, okay, let's mature together with the market. And we said, okay, let's develop, I would say, phase by phase. And we saw in 3 parts, so in our seaports, in Antwerp, Ghent, and in Zeebrugge, interest for projects. First of all, and it's the most mature project that we have, is Antwerp at Sea. And so it ties into the Kairos at Sea project that we just explained with BASF and Air Liquide, where we have an export terminal where we liquefy CO2. It also has a local backbone for the CO2 gaseous to go towards that terminal. We have a sizing up to 2.5 million tons, so a little bit of spare in the first phase, and also scalable for future phases if there is demand in the market. Today we're in our FEED studies. I think FID-wise, next year for us will be a very, very important year because we also want to take that next step. As we already have some good news here of Northern Lights of Porthos, I hope we can also come with good news next year. That would be great. In Ghent, we have the Carbon Hub. There we have ArcelorMittal has a large factory, large steel maker, where we actually collaborate with them and with the North Sea Port, the Port Authority, where we have a sizing, also liquefaction terminal sizing up to 4 million tons per annum, but still in the feasibility phase. So a little bit, still a longer track to develop. So also FID and COD dates are a bit later. Lastly, what I also would like to mention is Zeebrugge. For us, it's our typical, I would say, gateway for natural gas in Belgium, because we have our LNG terminal there, multiple gas pipelines coming into Zeebrugge. So we also see actually potential to do it the other way around, to export products to somewhere. And there we have a partnership with Equinor to develop a CO2 highway, actually a trunk line, offshore pipeline towards Norway from Zeebrugge. So that's this. If we look at challenges, I think I made quite a good summary of what has been said actually today. So you will see a lot of repetitions. What we feel is today, on the one hand, we want to scale up and really want to push forward such an industry of CCS, but we need to already make future-proof design choices, which is not always easy. Everybody speaks about CO2 specifications these days. You also have shipping conditions, for example, medium pressure, low pressure, and also infrastructure sizing. Then I'm talking a bit more about pipelines, because we have this DNA of oversizing, accommodating the market, but it's a nascent market. So we also need to make sound decisions and also sound investments. And so that's the challenge that we see. Other things that we see is also on contractual basis and logistics. As we are maturing much more, we get into those contractual, I would say, negotiations, discussions, and we also feel, okay, we have a value chain here. We cannot only look at our own small part of the value chain. We need to harmonize it, that it works efficiently. So we also need to interact with, I would say, the entire ecosystem to have a sort of set of rules which are working. And the last one is definitely costs, ETS. And the value chain costs, I think that's still some work to do and to provide some incentives that have to be given by governments. In terms of actions, the first one is a no-brainer, I would say. CO2 specifications, there should become some clarity on that. Some unification throughout the value chain, also to be able, for example, for export solutions, to go to multiple storage sites. Because we want to have open access infrastructure, we also want to leave it up to the market, to the emitters to choose their site of storage. But if we have different specifications, that's not always an easy thing to do or to guarantee. So that's one thing. On the other hand, regulatory clarity. As we have to make those future-proof investments, we also need some clarity on how actually such a market will be designed and also what our role then will be. So that's an important one. And then last one, I think we need to bring projects from PowerPoints towards FID, towards reality as we see it here. So I think that's really the next step, and we need to continue. And I think we need to thank also Northern Lights for being that Kickstarter. And now we need to continue with our projects. So thank you. And
Thank you for having us here as well. I think you said it well. Thanks to Northern Lights for inspiring us. Where are we when it comes to Portals? Portals, of course, is a joint venture between 3 state-owned companies, EBN, Gas Union, Port of Rotterdam Authority, and we're aiming to store up to 37 megatons in total, 2.5 megatons per annum. Our infrastructure that we're building through the Port of Rotterdam to an offshore storage location is future-proof, so we are able to kind of expand from this, but this is our basis. Now, we couldn't have done this without the partnership with our launching customers who will be doing the CO2 capture. So here again, when you're talking about partnerships, it's partnerships in the joint venture, but also partnerships with your customers. Very happy to announce that we have achieved FID last week. So, especially as execution director, it's very nice to have a project actually going into execution. We will be starting our construction in January, which is very soon, and we're hoping to be ready for operations in 2026. What are some of the challenges that we're looking at? Basically, we need to unlock the potential, and that is where Portals is also coming from. Portals is the first of its kind in many things. So we have the first storage license within Holland. We have a low-pressure depleted gas field, which brings its own set of technical feasibility issues. We have definitely new partnerships, which shouldn't be overlooked, because it takes time to invest in each other. And we need to do it first time right, as you said it, because we're not going to have many chances to redo it. It's also a stepping stone for CO2 storage in the Netherlands. We're looking at achieving a stable scope and actually realizing something, and at the same time developing the business, developing the market, and expanding. That means we have to be smart about it. So we have to achieve operations as fast as possible and keep our options open. Lastly, if you look at the global market situation, that's definitely a challenge for everyone here today. So again, we have to be smart about it. And we have to look at each other to kind of cope with these challenges. Call for action. It's been said a lot, but we have to do it together. I think there's a lot still to be kind of developed with each other when it comes to legislation, when it comes to permitting, when it comes to all kinds of legislation boundaries. And we also have to show the public that we can be compliant, that we can actually conform to this legislation. Conformance, I said it in our start, we also have to demonstrate that we're able to do it on a technical side. And lastly, we have to be able to create this together. And I think that's the most important call for action. We need to move from paper towards production. We need to do it. So in that sense, I'm very happy to be also handing over to Annemarie Manger, Program Director for Aramis. Because when it comes to unlocking the potential, you're our key asset in that sense.
Thank you very much. So yes, I hope to add a fourth C to Helen's C's, and that's the C of collaboration, the C of collaboration between Portals and Aramis, but also the C of collaboration with 4 parties, because Aramis is a joint project program set up by EBN, GasUnie, Shell and Total Energies. So a nice mixture of public and private parties. And we're trying to get the Dutch infrastructure, or Northwest European infrastructure, up to scale, I should say. So here's a slide of the complexity of our particular value chain. You can see that there's emitters, hopefully to be connected from France, Belgium, and potentially Germany. We all know that Germany still has a connection to be made in the ratification of the London Protocol, and potentially there's the Delta Rhine corridor linking up Porthos and Aramis from the German side. The other parts will be also shipped through the CO2 Next terminal. So we have the liquid terminal from CO2 Next in the premises in the Maasvlakte, and we have Porthos for the compression part. And then there's the Aramis trunk line, which is having the ambition to be storing 22 million tons per annum of CO2 towards various launch in open access. 3 launch stores have been already identified, and they will be having the starting volume of 7.5 million tons per annum, which we hope to reach in 2028. The overall capacity for that trunk line and for the storage capacity is 400 million tons. So, what are our milestones and the exciting context we're currently in? I've been appointed from the outside, from the steel industry, as an emitter moving towards this CCS industry in April last year. And we're now in a stage where the 4 parties are actually forming and shaping up one joint team, but because we will be going into FEED shortly, the front-end engineering and design, also moving up our activities to be working towards an FID. So that transition to one joint team hopefully will increase the momentum and increase the efficiency in our internal organization, and will also allow us to get all the deliverables right for our design, but also for our permit application, which is planned early next year. And you are aware that permit applications and also obtaining permits is a big thing in the Netherlands, and that's why we also celebrated the verdict on Porthos, and we celebrated also the Porthos FID, which is for us also a major stepping stone. Interesting for us also is the Dutch general elections. There's a couple of weeks to go. There's a couple of new parties. One of the newest parties has only today publicized their program, and I'm very happy to have read that they are also confirming that there's a need for CCS and will be supporting those initiatives, which is in the Dutch context very relevant, because they are expected to have a large part of parliament in the future. Well, all of the emitters are currently awaiting, at least those who have submitted in 2023, the outcome of the subsidy part. As stated before, there's Dutch emitters that will apply for this subsidy. There's also some emitters from outside the Netherlands that have different arrangements. And then, of course, we're also following the European context to see what will be the carbon management strategies, particularly of Germany and France. So yes, we were asked also for the challenges part. You can name a few, but I think for me it's quite clear that the alignment over the overall value chain is what is the most complex. Really, that we all have to jump into this together. We have to be synchronized. I think the risk and the interactivity risk was already, and the interdependency risk was already mentioned. But it really takes a lot of courage and cooperation to be getting this aligned. We're also starting with a huge ambition of 22 million tons. I stated the initial business case will allow for 7.5 million tons, so we do have over-dimensioning of that pipeline. And that's why we also feel that there's a need for some public support, and we will be applying, or we have been applying, for the Connecting Europe facility. We're a PCI status project, and we hope to get that part also co-funded with European funds. I mentioned it already, permitting. We're working on it already since 2021. We're taking the lessons from Portos, and we're trying to make sure that our engineering deliverables are currently translated into the proper permitting ones. And then, of course, the most asked question is, when is it going to be finished? So also here, these are ambitions and commitments, and you will see some of them between brackets because we do want to take some kind of disclaimer in case we would be getting into permitting problems. But the solid ones in white are the ones that we are actually going for. So we're now moving into that feed phase, moving up towards FID, which we will plan to take in 2025, and our ready for startup date is in 2028. But that is, of course, with that starting volume, the 7.5 million ton, and then we will be growing from there to that 22 million ton per annum. So we look forward to the scale up. Thank you.
Thank you so much all for you. I mean, I got goosebumps just listening to all of you. Even though there are still some bumps in the roads, things are actually happening, and that's very promising. So good luck with the continuation, and maybe, I know someone of you said, maybe we're going to receive a gold medal for collaboration. I hope so. Collaboration. Yeah. And now, as we are close to the finish line of this year's summit, we're going to concentrate on the projects we are at physically. That is the terminal and storage sites of Northern Lights. Sverre Overå, project director and responsible for the delivery of the Northern Lights facilities, is ready to give us a status report on the project. So I suspect that there's a lot more to this project than meets the eye, considering that a large part of Northern Lights, the joint venture, is about installations below the sea surface, on the seabed, and 2,600 meters below the seabed itself. Now, we've already heard that Northern Lights is on schedule, but what does that mean exactly? And I wonder, do you, Sverre, allow yourself to be proud? I know him as a relatively modest man, but I hope that you do allow yourself to be a little bit proud of the fact that your project is actually running according to plan, Sverre. Everyone else has received a nice warm applause when entering the stage, and you're going to have that too.
Am I proud of this? Definitely. And I do feel proud every time I come here. But it's much more than me being proud. It's actually a team effort. And I'm very proud that I have a fantastic team, probably the best team there is to execute such a project. Not only what you see here, but all of it. This year, so far, we've had 295 perfect safety days, which is quite an achievement. If you check the calendar, you will see that it's day 296. So we've had one unfortunate incident so far, and only one. We're also tracking quite well to be on schedule, and we're on budget. So given the external circumstances, I think that's quite good. So I thought we'd just frame it a little bit first, because what is the project that we're talking about when I talk about the project? Obviously, we're part of Longship, the overall framing set up by the Norwegian government, for which we're quite grateful, obviously. The project part is what I have grayed out here is still Longship, but it's not part of what we call the project. It's the capture sites, and it's the transport solution. Those are outside of what I call the project in this case. So my project is what you see here, the receiving terminal. It's all the stuff that goes underneath the water, the pipeline, the subsea installations, the wells, and the reservoir, and so on. All of that. So what you see out here is out of my current budget of about 700 million euros, this is only 1/3 of the spending. Okay, 2/3 you won't see because it's underneath the water. So I'll have to talk about it, but not show it. But since we are here, I thought I would spend a little bit of time just to tell you what you're seeing outside of the window. And for those who are paying attention on the stream, they can at least see the photo, which is almost as nice. The import jetty obviously is the most distinct feature when you see this immediately, and it's the most important. This is where the CO2 will arrive. with the ships that are being built at the moment. From there, the CO2 will flow into the intermediate storage tanks, which are essentially the largest pieces of equipment sitting out here. We then pumping it with pumps into a pipeline. And the pipeline actually starts onshore out here on the site. And that's due to the nature of the terrain and the need to have a proper exit for the pipeline itself. Then we have a fairly large area which has been prepared for expansion, because this is one of the key features also of Northern Lights. Yes, it's part of Longship, but it's also prepared to be much more. So there is scalability built into everything. So we can scale up when the market is ready for it. Then, of course, we have some practical things like substation for electrical gear and workshops and so on. And then we have this very nice building where we're hosting visitors on a regular basis, actually every day. There is a great interest in CCS. So it would be very nice to see it materialize in real projects to a larger degree, but hopefully that will happen. We have now passed 6,000 visitors to this site, and that's even before we're finished. So that's good. Progress on the onshore terminal, as you can see there, 94%. We're actually now in commissioning. There's a few bits and pieces being put together, but commissioning is ongoing as we speak. So that's where we are, and we will be ready for operation next year. Then we have the largest part of the scope and the poorest visualization of it, unfortunately. We've tried various ways to make this easier to show through photos and so on, but since it spans quite a long distance, it's 110 kilometers long pipeline, there are subsea installations and umbilicals, power cables, fiber optics, and so on. It's very hard to make a good representation. So this part, as you can see, is slightly less complete. The reason for that is that we are missing the near shore part of the pipeline. The pipeline is being put in two sections. The first section is installed and ready. The second section will be installed in April next year, and that will complete the offshore scope. So that's kind of the outstanding part of the what we call the subsea and pipeline scope. Again, it will be ready for operation next year. Then, of course, we have the storage itself, what it's all about. We have 2 wells drilled. We aim to utilize one of them for the injection, and then we have one which we call a contingent well, which is there as a reserve, as a backup, should there be any issue with the first well, or should we need to do any kind of maintenance or workover on the well that is in operation. So this will allow us to have continuous injection, is the plan. The storage itself has been proven through both drilling the wells and also testing the first one. So this is not a depleted gas reservoir. This is a saline aquifer. It has a large extension, and one of the features of the way we're planning this is that we will essentially develop by drilling additional wells as we progress and increase capacity over time. So we will utilize the entire area ultimately, but we have essentially proven that we have capacity for the initial 1.5 million tons per year for 25 years, and we also have capacity for filling the pipeline to more than 5 million tons and also do that for 25 years. So capacity-wise, there is not an issue on this. So again, you can see we're claiming 95% on the well and reservoir scope. What remains there is what we call an injectivity test. something that we're going to perform in next month, actually, where we will inject, in this case, water, because that's what we have available. So we will be injecting water in both wells to confirm that everything is as planned. So that is more or less where we are at the moment.
Thank you so much, Sverre. So I guess the next milestone is going to be when the first ship actually arrives, mid-2024. It is. Perfect. Well, congratulations on being on schedule, and thank you for sharing this with us. And good luck with the rest of the project. As we saw, not that much left. So to sum up and sort of make the full circle of this year's summit, I would like to re-invite Børre Jacobsen, the Managing Director of Northern Lights Joint Venture, to the stage to sum up. And I was just wondering, what do you think, Børre? Do we have reason to be optimistic when it comes to getting this acceleration of CCS going?
Looking around, looking at all the presentations and all the things that go on, we have to be optimistic, and I am optimistic. I'm always an optimist, but this helps.
I'm going to leave it the stage to you.
And thank you for letting me sum up. It's a tough to do that in 4 minutes.
Yeah.
A good day like this. I think it is. It's been wonderful to hear you all, and I think we have cause to be optimistic. There are a lot of challenges, but we are facing the same challenges. That's what you pick up when I hear all the talk, and we are looking at finding solutions. So I want to start by thanking every one of you, the speakers, the panelists, the guests who have traveled and taken the time to be with us today, and of course the several hundred that are joining us online as well. I hope you have also enjoyed the program and the discussion. I'd like to thank the team that's been putting this together. Those we see here, and most of them we don't see. They are out in the hallway. A lot of work goes into this, and a lot of the work is also there, so it's going to be interesting for those watching online. And I think it's been a great production. So good success for the day, and I'll just try and sum up a little bit. And actually, I wrote my summary in advance, which is a bit of a dangerous thing to do, because if it doesn't meet your expectation, you have to start all afresh. And the thing is, it did meet my expectations. So I think that my notes are pretty much what I had hoped. The part that is easy is the theme, making CCS viable, and I think we heard a lot about that today. And we can see, and I'm heartened by the progress in Porthos. I know the tribulation and struggles you went through. And I can only imagine what it is to be facing that on top of everything else. And we wish, of course, Aramis and the other projects that we heard about all success, also on the infrastructure side. So that is extremely encouraging. I think we are making CCS viable. I think it is, and we have to make it viable. And that is the backdrop we have for climate change. But it's a momentous task. It is not easy. And we need to do a lot of things differently, and we need to challenge ourselves and to capture the large amounts of CO2 that we need to store. So I think asking us, is it commercial? Are the regulatory framework in place? Do we have the technical and the environmentally aspects in place? Is the fundamentally right thing to ask us? Some things that stuck to me from what I heard today that I think is important, and we heard from RBC, we are in the waste handling business. I fully agree with that. But we come from the oil and gas business. And that is a very big mindset change. And we have to think about that, you know. And also, as I say, we have also to think we are a customer and a margin business. That's different. We have to challenge the way we do things, but we are not going to challenge the fact that we want to do it safely. So there are things here that we need to think about. So I thought that was something I bring with me. There was, Lise said something which is extremely obvious. Lise from Yara, Lise Winter, extremely obvious, but it sort of struck me as a very good thing to say. If nobody starts, nothing moves. And that, I think, is a little bit characterizing of what we are doing. And Floris from Air Liquide, it's allowed to dream. I think that is taking Alex a bit further. I think that's also when you look at the challenge ahead. So I leave with a great sense of responsibility, recognizing that the challenge, so many things that needs to fall in place. Can we forge the technical, the commercial, and the policy and regulations to make this happen? I have I feel a great sense of pride of what we achieved and where we are. I'm inspired by today. And what inspires me is that we are a community and of like-minded people who are doing everything we can to develop CCS, not only here in Norway, in Europe and beyond. And we are at the start of this. And we know that the challenge is there and we need to grow quickly. So most of all, I am convinced that we are doing the right things. It will take time, but we need to stay the course. Ours is a community of perseverance. CCS has had many false starts, but we carry on. And here we are. Ruth?
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was a great sum up, even though you wrote it beforehand. So yeah,
I did improvise a bit.
Yes, you did, and I think you did it very, very, very nicely. So, thank you once again. We started by thanking you for inviting us here today. I've at least have enjoyed myself. I hope the rest of the audience, and also the digital one, has. There's one piece of chocolate left in the box for the digital audience. Sverre said that, yeah, we're showing you a picture, but now you're actually going to see a live film. And I'm looking at the digital audience now. They're going to have a live film, so just lean back, enjoy the tour of the site, daytime and nighttime, I think it is. I think it's going to be a great joy. So once again, we can say thank you for today and for looking and being engaged and participating. So thank you once again.